The story begins on a sunny day where everything had been going smoothly until things suddenly took a turn for the worse. As people were crossing the road, a truck driver lost consciousness, causing the vehicle to speed forward uncontrollably. Among the crowd, there was one girl who was unable to escape in time. People grew anxious and began saying that someone should help her, but no one stepped forward. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, everyone was shocked to see Shujinko Kuno rush in. Using his karate skills, he attempted to stop the truck and save the girl. Miraculously, the girl managed to escape, but Shujinko could not save himself and lost his life in the process. When he opened his eyes again, Shujinko found himself in a strange place, surrounded by floating islands. As he looked around in confusion, a woman approached him and introduced herself as Glen, the goddess of the Crown Prince Palace. She explained that she would be his guide. Glen went on to tell him that he was going to be reincarnated into another world, something similar to a parallel world. She explained that this new world had no science and was instead filled with magic, much like a fantasy realm. However, the Mac was not paying attention to her explanation. Instead, he was lost in his own thoughts, feeling frustrated and disappointed that he had lost his life to something as mundane as a truck. He reflected that he might have been able to win if he had dodged differently and attacked the engine directly. He also considered that targeting the tires first might have been a better strategy. While he was absorbed in these thoughts, Glen tried to get his attention by poking him from behind, wondering if he had been listening at all. When he turned around, he was startled to see her and questioned who she was. Seeing his confusion, Glen told him that he needed to listen carefully. As she continued explaining, he observed her closely. Noticing this, Glen demonstrated a few punches and mentioned that she often went to the gym and had recently been very passionate about training. Shujinko was shocked that she seemed to respond to his thoughts, and he protested that it was not what he had intended to say. In response, Glen told him to sit quietly and listen to her explanation. After hearing her out, he became confused upon learning about the concept of a parallel world. Glen clarified that it was essentially a world of swords and magic, like those found in fantasy stories. He wondered if such a world would also contain monsters, to which Glen confirmed that it would. Upon hearing this, Shujinko suddenly became excited. He realized that such a world would be the perfect place to pursue mastery in karate. He reflected that he had traveled across the world in search of strong opponents, and now he finally had the opportunity to prove himself. Glen, however, found his sudden enthusiasm puzzling and wondered why he had become so eager all of a sudden. Shujinko felt that this was a stage prepared especially for him, something he believed had been bestowed upon him by a goddess. Glen clarified that she was indeed the one who had granted him this opportunity. She further explained that as a transmigrator, he would also receive a special advantage, a cheat ability. Shujinko initially assumed that this cheat would be some kind of martial art technique. However, Glen explained that it was actually a powerful skill that could defy the laws of physics, granting him extraordinary strength or magical abilities far beyond those of ordinary people. Although she expected him to be excited upon hearing this, she was taken aback when he rejected the offer of the cheat skill instead. The karate enthusiast remarked that gaining such power without effort was not his way. He noted that the monsters were dangerous and could even breathe fire. He added that if he were to fall, it would only be because of his karate. Soon after, he left the place. Meanwhile, Glen was dealing with her own circumstances, which made her feel that it would be troublesome if he were to die like that. She wondered who had even sent such a person there. At the same time, Shujinko was suddenly transported to a battlefield where a war was ongoing. Before he could understand what was happening, a girl called out to him, urging him to run. However, by the time he looked at her, she had already collapsed. He began to wonder if he had been brought into a parallel world. He then heard a voice questioning whether anyone had survived. As he stood there, a monster suddenly appeared, a minotaur controlled by someone. Shujinko tried to reassure the girl that everything would be fine, but she insisted that he should run away. However, he refused to leave, as this was exactly the kind of situation he had been seeking, and he prepared himself to fight. The girl, frightened, told him that he would not be able to do anything against the minotaur with his bare hands. In response, he assured her not to worry, stating that he had already defeated several bulls before. The minotaur attacked him with its weapon, but he swiftly dodged. As the creature continued its assault, he observed that its weapon was massive, and its attack pattern was straightforward. By analyzing its center of gravity, he realized he could predict its next 10 moves. He attempted to strike the minotaur with a kick, but found its body extremely tough, forcing him to retreat. He estimated that the creature was around 5 meters tall and understood that its massive size contributed to its immense strength. He knew that the larger the opponent, the greater its offensive and defensive capabilities. He recalled that he had fought numerous Western professional wrestlers during his journey to improve his martial arts and had experienced incredibly close battles with them. In his assessment, all of them had been stronger than the Minotaur. With that realization, he became confident that he could win. The girl, still in shock, watched in disbelief as he fought the Minotaur head-on without any weapons. When the Minotaur swung its weapon with both hands, he seized the opportunity and leapt forward, landing a punch on its face. He took advantage of its large frame and delivered a series of precise strikes to the head, the Adam's apple, the solar plexus, and the crotch, targeting its vital points until it finally collapsed. As the girl looked on in amazement, another person appeared and commented that it was a display of karate. That person wondered whether Shujinko was a transmigrator, finding the situation quite interesting. Using Asmifaruk's gauntlet, the newcomer flew into the sky and remarked that his task was already complete. He then told the girl, Wilma, that they would meet again and departed at high speed. Meanwhile, Shujinko remained, standing there silently watching everything unfold. Wilma felt that Shujinko was not just an ordinary person, so she approached him and wondered whether he was a knight of the castle. Shujinko, unsure of what to say, admitted that he was not from there. Suddenly, a knight rushed in, addressing Wilma as the princess and asking what had happened. The knight quickly noticed that Wilma's dress was slightly torn and immediately misunderstood the situation, assuming that Shujinko was responsible. Acting on that assumption, the knight moved to attack Shujinko and warned him to stay away from Princess Wilma. However, Wilma intervened and told the knight to stop, explaining that Shujinko was not an enemy, but the one who had defeated the demon beast and saved her. The knight, surprised, wondered if that strange man had truly defeated the Minotaur. Wilma firmly stated that she would not tolerate any disrespect toward the person who had saved her life. Hearing this, Shujinko realized that Wilma was not just an ordinary girl, but someone of high status. Later that night, while sitting alone near a statue, Shujinko looked around and remarked to himself that the world was completely different from what he had known. At that moment, Glenn appeared behind him and reminded him that she had already told him about this world. Shujinko questioned why she had returned. Glenn, clearly irritated, asked if he had really forgotten who she was, reminding him that she was the one who had brought him into this world. Shujinko began to wonder if everything that had happened was not a dream. In response, Glenn commented that it was the first time she had encountered someone so unworthy of her guidance, as he had not listened to anything she had told him. She added that she had been worried about him, which was why she came to check on him. But things had not gone well. Shujinko told her not to worry, saying that he had already defeated a Minotaur. Hearing this, Glenn became even more frustrated and pointed out that this was exactly why she had been worried. She explained that he did not even possess a cheat skill, so it was reckless of him to jump into such a fight. As she continued expressing her frustration, Shujinko asked whether he had been summoned to this world. Glenn admitted that she was not entirely sure about that either, which led Shujinko to criticize her for being irresponsible. Glenn then explained that there was no Demon King for him to defeat, and suggested that there must be some other purpose behind his arrival. She stated that it was likely part of the greater will, and that, as a low-level goddess, there were many things she could not foresee. For the time being, she advised him to do whatever he wished, but warned that she would be in serious trouble if he died. Therefore, she urged him to act more carefully from now on. Shujinko internally thought that such guidance sounded extremely irresponsible, regardless of the world he was in. At that moment, Princess Wilma arrived, looking for Shujinko. She commented that she had finally found him, and once again thanked him for saving her life. She then asked if he had been speaking to someone. Shujinko noticed that Glenn had hidden herself and therefore denied it, instead asking Wilma if everything was all right. Wilma replied that the situation had been handled, and that fortunately, no one had died. As she spoke, she began to blush slightly, which made Shujinko wonder if something was wrong. Suddenly, Wilma grew excited and asked whether she could learn the technique that Shujinko had used earlier. Shujinko felt confused as Wilma suddenly exclaimed that it had been incredible to see someone defeat a Minotaur with bare hands. She wondered what level or class one would need to achieve such strength. Her curiosity grew as she questioned him about his training, his identity, and where he had come from. She kept asking him to explain, but he told her to calm down, pointing out that his clothes were slipping off due to the pulley. At that moment, the knight Geddes arrived and told Wilma that she was troubling their guest. Hearing this, Wilma felt embarrassed and apologized, admitting that she had become overly excited. She then excused herself. As they stood there, Geddes informed Wilma that the injured knights had all fallen asleep and that she herself looked exhausted, suggesting that she should get some rest. Wilma agreed, apologizing once again for her earlier behavior, and mentioned that they could continue their conversation later. With that, she took her leave. After she left, Shujinko asked Geddes whether his injuries had fully healed. Geddes replied that they had, explaining that the princess had treated them. He added that despite her appearance, she possessed remarkable magical ability. He then suggested that they should proceed, stating that he would guide the transmigrator to the guest room. Hearing this, Shujinko was surprised and wondered how Geddes knew about the existence of another world. In response, Geddes explained that this was not his first time encountering a transmigrator. A few days had passed since the incident, During that time, Wilma formally introduced herself, explaining that she had been born to one of the king's concubines and was the 8th princess of the kingdom. At present, Shujinko, along with Wilma and Geddes, was traveling toward the royal capital in a horse-drawn carriage. As they journeyed, Wilma mentioned that the king was currently absent but was expected to return soon. She expressed confidence that he would be delighted to witness Shujinko's technique. Once again, she brought up his fighting style and wondered whether it was a martial art from a country called Japan, from the world Shujinko had come from. Shujinko felt slightly annoyed, as he found it difficult to explain such details, but he eventually agreed. Deep down, he thought that if one were to be more precise, it was closer to Chinese martial arts. Nevertheless, he was pleased that she showed such keen interest. As the carriage continued moving, Shujinko asked whether the royal capital was still far from their current location. Geddes replied that it would take about half a day and assured him that they would arrive at the royal castle before evening. He also mentioned that the Duke of Holland had already arranged a welcome banquet for Wilma. Upon hearing the name Duke Holland, a gentle and cheerful smile appeared on Wilma's face. Before long, they arrived near a bustling district. Shujinko was surprised to see how lively the area was, with activity everywhere. What astonished him even more was the presence of various races besides humans. Geddes explained that this was the district outside the castle gates, where demi-humans, along with orcs and even elves, lived together. Shujinko observed the differences in the body structures and movements of the various races around him. He realized that if he were to teach them karate, he would need to develop specialized training methods tailored to each of them. Soon, they entered the royal capital. Wilma remarked that no matter how many times she visited, the city never failed to amaze her. They proceeded to the royal palace where the Duke of Holland welcomed Shujinko to the capital, referring to him as a plain walker. At that moment, Wilma's demeanor shifted completely from how she had behaved earlier, becoming more composed and formal. Shujinko greeted the Duke in return. Seated comfortably, Holland remarked that he had already heard the entire story. He spoke of how a Shujinko had once rebelled and compared Shujinko to the hero who had defeated the Demon King. He added that it was said a visitor from another world would appear someday, though it was surprising that such a person had emerged from a remote castle. His attention then turned to Shujinko's white outfit. He questioned whether it was clothing from the Shujinko's world and commented that it looked rather eccentric. He went on to describe it as shabby, prompting laughter from those present in the hall. Holland continued by saying that as a transmigrator, it was perhaps unavoidable for Shujinko to appear that way, though the whiteness of his outfit certainly made him stand out. Wilma immediately objected, raising her voice and warning Holland not to be rude. She reminded him that Shujinko was their guest and the very person who had saved her life. In response, Holland offered a light apology, acknowledging that the Shujinko had indeed rescued the 8th princess, who was also half-elf, something even nobles could not easily accomplish. He expressed admiration for Shujinko's heroic actions and then gestured toward the banquet, stating that the feast, along with the finest alcohol, had been prepared in his honor. He encouraged everyone to enjoy themselves and added mockingly that they would not object even if the planewalker continued wearing such shabby clothes. Shujinko remained silent, though someone in the hall remarked that transmigrators were truly pitiful. Hearing this, Shujinko reflected inwardly that planewalkers like himself were not always welcomed, especially by those in power, like Holland. He realized that this banquet was less about gratitude and more about displaying superiority over an outsider, even one who had saved the princess. He understood that such people existed in every world. Still, he chose to remain quiet, as he had grown accustomed to criticism, even in his previous world, where his unconventional approach to karate had been labeled heretical. At that moment, Wilma became emotional, confusing those around her. Holland, noticing the shift, questioned what Shujinko was doing. Without warning, Shujinko stepped forward and knelt down. Wilma, surprised, wondered what he was doing. Shujinko then explained that the white karate uniform they had ridiculed was originally derived from robes used in Shinto rituals, symbolizing honesty and selflessness. He added that those who wore it devoted themselves fully to battle, ready to face death at any moment. Holland grew irritated, questioning Shujinko's intentions. However, Shujinko maintained his position and, with an intense gaze, explained that kneeling in such a manner was a gesture of utmost respect toward one's opponent, a declaration of complete commitment, even in the face of death. The atmosphere in the hall shifted instantly. Despite Shujinko lowering himself, Holland felt an overwhelming pressure, as though he could barely breathe. Shujinko was demonstrating zarai, a form of etiquette in which both individuals show absolute respect to one another. In that moment, it was clear that Shujinko was not submitting, but rather declaring his readiness to fight, even if it meant death. Startled, Holland stood up and questioned whether the karate Shujinko had used to defeat the Minotaur was some kind of cheat skill. Shujinko denied this, stating that karate was the art of surpassing the limits of the human body and mastering one's strength. Holland narrowed his gaze and demanded that Shujinko demonstrate the true power of karate. He then ordered his men to bring in Burgund. As the soldiers carried out Holland's order, Wilma remarked that the situation was unfair, pointing out that a giant knight had been brought to stand against Shujinko. Holland responded by saying that Shujinko appeared to be very confident in his abilities. He added that the warrior he had summoned was capable of killing a minotaur with a single blow, and suggested that they should wait and see how the situation would unfold. Shujinko observed that his opponent was clad in full plate armor and carried a short, thick sword. The armor appeared to be of the highest quality, making the man seem like a walking fortress. It was mentioned that the opponent had been specifically prepared to face Shujinko, especially after hearing that Shujinko had defeated monsters with his bare hands. Holland remarked that Shujinko seemed different and wondered why he was just sitting there, questioning whether he had already frozen. In response, Shujinko merely smirked in quiet appreciation. Meanwhile, Wilma declared that the entertainment had gone on long enough and urged Holland to stop. Holland glared at her, questioning what she meant, as fighting barehanded was Shujinko's specialty, and knights often did not have the luxury of choosing their opponents. Some of the knights asked Geddes whether it was acceptable for them to remain there and watch. Holland, too, found himself curious about how the battle would unfold. Eventually, Shujinko stood up and stated that everything was fine. He even mockingly referred to Holland as fatty, which angered Holland, who could not believe that Shujinko dared to address him in such a manner. However, Shujinko admitted that he did not understand what grudge Holland held against transmigrators, but declared that regardless of the reason, if anyone chose to fight him, he would gladly accept the challenge. Wilma appeared worried about the transmigrator, but Shujinko reassured her not to worry and to simply trust in his karate. Holland then ordered his knight to kill Shujinko, sarcastically stating that it would serve as a warm welcome and instructing him to ensure that Shujinko would never stand again. The knight raised his shield, and Shujinko immediately recognized that the movement was exactly as he had expected, smooth and controlled, despite the heavy plate armor. It was clear that the opponent did not rely solely on his large build and was, in fact, highly skilled. The armored knight charged forward with surprising speed, catching Shujinko off guard. When Shujinko attempted to land a punch, the shield intercepted it, forcing him to leap back several steps. Observing the imprint of his punch on the shield, Shujinko realized that penetrating such thick steel was nearly impossible. However, his greater concern lay in the opponent's movements. It was often a misconception that heavily armored fighters were slow, but in truth, there had been many accounts of knights performing exceptionally well while wearing armor, as it was carefully tailored to suit the wearer's physique and enhance their combat ability. As the battle resumed, Shujinko continued dodging while managing to land a few strikes of his own. After several exchanges, however, he was struck by the shield and sent crashing into some nearby onlookers who grew increasingly irritated with him. Despite this, Shujinko remained calm, assessing that his opponent possessed both strength and skill, along with considerable experience. This, he thought, was only to be expected of a knight from a fantasy world, someone who had never lacked real combat opponents. Geddes approached Shujinko and remarked that it seemed the fight was becoming too much for him, suggesting that he should allow Geddes to assist. In response, Shujinko simply smirked, reflecting on the fact that he was fighting barehanded against an opponent fully clad in steel armor from head to toe. Even so, he did not believe that he could lose. He then told Geddes that he had no intention of continuing to be pushed back. Shujinko continued the fight, intending to test whether his opponent could keep up with him. He suddenly dashed through the crowd at high speed, destroying anything that stood in his way while searching for something useful nearby. Soon he found an object and hurled it toward his opponent's face, momentarily obstructing his vision. Using that opportunity, Shujinko grabbed onto another object and propelled himself upward, leaping over his opponent's head and catching hold of the overhead lights. By the time the enemy regained his sight, Shujinko was nowhere to be seen. From above, Shujinko remarked that he wanted to see whether his opponent would still be standing after his next move. In the next moment, he shattered the chandelier, causing it to crash down onto his opponent. He even referred to this move as his secret technique, the chandelier crush. Holland appeared furious at what he witnessed and shouted at Shujinko, accusing him of being a coward and questioning whether he could truly call that a fair match. In response, Shujinko explained that a battle was shaped by the choices of the fighters. He pointed out that if someone chose to wield large weapons and wear heavy armor along with a shield for protection, then those same choices would inevitably create weaknesses. According to him, if a person relied solely on overwhelming a barehanded opponent through equipment and brute force, it only meant that they had already lost. He further expressed that, unlike his opponent, he had unlimited freedom in combat, as he could use his body as a weapon and adapt to any situation. For him, victory lay in avoiding the worst outcomes and seizing opportunities, and that, he believed, was the essence of karate. At that moment, Holland angrily dismissed Shujinko's reasoning as nothing more than an excuse. However, Wilma intervened and rebuked Holland, reminding him that he had been the one to initiate the challenge in the first place. She added that his behavior was even more disgraceful, especially after losing. Holland, angered by her words, tried to shove her aside while insulting her, even going as far as calling her a wild monkey. Meanwhile, Shujinko noticed that his opponent, Burgund, had regained consciousness. He remarked that he had never claimed he could not win in a direct confrontation. As Holland and Wilma continued watching, Shujinko declared that it was now the second round of his match with Burgund. Burgund immediately launched another attack, attempting to strike Shujinko while also using his shield offensively. However, Shujinko skillfully evaded the attack, halted the momentum with his fist, and delivered a powerful punch straight to Burgund's chest. Wilma was shocked by what she witnessed, and the entire crowd fell silent in disbelief. Holland, however, shouted angrily at Burgund, criticizing him for failing to land even a single scratch on Shujinko, who had been fighting barehanded. One of the knights, trembling, urged Holland to look at Burgund's back. It was severely damaged, as if it had been crushed from within. Shujinko had used a technique known as uraate, also referred to as a double hit, in which the force of the strike passed through the opponent's body and erupted from the back, making it appear as though the impact had burst outward. No one dared to speak against Shujinko after witnessing this. Shujinko calmly excused himself, explaining that he had been unable to fully control his strength and requested that Burgund be given immediate medical attention. When the others rushed to check on Burgund, Wilma felt both relieved and amazed by Shujinko's victory. She realized that he possessed enough strength to defeat even a formidable opponent head-on. Turning toward Holland, she glared at him and declared that this outcome was entirely his loss. Holland, visibly shaken, began to tremble. Wilma continued, stating that Shujinko was not only her guest but also a guest of the king, and that it was common courtesy to properly treat someone of such status. She then ordered Holland to apologize for his behavior. Holland refused, shouting at her to remain silent. He declared that he would never bow his head to someone like Shujinko and proudly proclaimed himself as the head of a Marquis family that had protected the country for generations. He boasted of his noble lineage and went further to insult Wilma, blaming the country's decline on people like her, accusing her of tainting noble blood. He then ordered the soldiers to assemble, accusing Shujinko of being an insurgent who had infiltrated the royal palace by deceiving the princess during the king's absence, and commanded them to kill him. Several fully armed knights surrounded Shujinko. Wilma grew worried and attempted to intervene, but both Holland and Getty stopped her, warning that it would be dangerous. Shujinko then called out, expressing that Wilma had taken good care of him and that he had no intention of causing her trouble. However, he added that he could not forgive Holland's actions, stating that he was not a saint who would tolerate such behavior. He immediately launched his attack against the soldiers, who were unable to counter his speed and strength. Noticing the commander giving orders, Shujinko targeted him first and swiftly struck him down. As the remaining soldiers charged at him, Shujinko engaged them all at once. Within a short time, he defeated every one of them and fled the scene. Geddes watched in astonishment, realizing that Shujinko's strength was monstrous. Shujinko leapt out of a window and landed in the courtyard, only to encounter another man standing behind him. The man declared that Shujinko would now face the king and ominously stated that his life would end there. As the man moved to attack, Shujinko struck first and defeated him with ease. Shujinko briefly wondered whether he should continue fighting everyone who stood in his way. However, his thoughts were interrupted when he noticed a massive shadow looming in the sky. The guards exclaimed that reinforcements had arrived. Their confidence returned as they revealed that a dragon rider had come. Dragons, especially wyverns, were powerful war assets, tamed creatures used for aerial combat, much like helicopters in the modern world. Wilma was stunned at the sight. Shujinko, however, appeared excited and remarked that it was quite the grand welcome. As the dragon descended to attack, Shujinko managed to land a punch while skillfully dodging its assaults. Meanwhile, the rider took aim, preparing to shoot. Shujinko anticipated the attack and leaped aside, recognizing the coordinated assault, precise, sniper-like strikes from the rider delivered between the dragon's attacks. By the time Shujinko steadied himself, the enemy had already retreated into the sky, proving to be a formidable opponent. Moments later, the dragon hovered above. Seeing this, Wilma urgently called out to Shujinko, warning him to be careful. The dragon then unleashed a blast of flames toward him. Yet Shujinko stood his ground, expressing his amazement at such a creature. He reflected that fighting a flying opponent was something he had never even imagined before. In his mind, he began simulating various combat scenarios, recalling techniques he had never used until now. Determined, he resolved to test those unused techniques in this battle. Shujinko decided to begin with an anti-aerial technique, intending to test it to his heart's content. After some time, Holland arrived outside along with several knights, wondering whether Shujinko was still alive. A knight then pointed out that Shujinko had somehow endured the dragon's blazing attack, though his body was now covered in wounds. Holland shouted that it was only a matter of time before Shujinko died, insisting that this was the fate he deserved for causing so much trouble and that he would soon disappear from the world. Meanwhile, the Dragon Rider was shocked that Shujinko had managed to dodge an attack that should have been impossible to evade. Determined, he launched another assault. This time, however, Shujinko stood his ground and used his power to block the dragon's flames. The sight stunned everyone. It was described as one of the most profound defensive techniques of karate, so refined that even something as intangible as flames could be resisted. The Dragon Rider attempted to shoot again, but Shujinko evaded the attack and seized the opportunity to counter. The rider's strategy had always been to corner opponents with overwhelming force, predicting their movements and concentrating attacks at their destination. However, Shujinko realized that by minimizing his movements and subtly altering his evasion, he could disrupt those predictions entirely. Using that insight, Shujinko closed the distance and launched himself toward the Dragon Rider. The rider was caught completely off guard by this unexpected aerial engagement and was struck down. In the next moment, Shujinko found himself atop the dragon. He understood that flight depended on precise joint movements and that immobilizing those joints would rob the creature of its ability to stay airborne. Acting quickly, he applied a locking technique, forcing the dragon into a descent. From below, Holland watched in growing fear as the situation spiraled out of control. The dragon came crashing down, landing just inches away from him. Trembling, sweating, and barely able to laugh through his fear, Holland stared in disbelief. Amid the chaos, Shujinko rose like a monster and loudly challenged anyone else who wished to fight him. The crowd was utterly terrified, and some wondered if that destruction still was not enough. Shujinko then declared that if no one else would step forward, he would take the initiative himself. At that moment, the king arrived and commanded that it was enough. He asked Shujinko to stand down and apologized for the rudeness of his subordinates. Wilma was overjoyed to see her father, and Shujinko quickly realized that the man before him was the king. Shujinko later accompanied the king to a private room. The king admitted that his ministers had caused significant trouble and expressed his sense of responsibility, even though he had not been present earlier. In response, Shujinko stated that it had gone beyond mere trouble, as his life had been in danger, and added that for all he knew, even the king himself might intend to kill him. The king acknowledged that such caution was natural. However, he remarked that even if traps had been set, he doubted they would have been enough to kill Shujinko. He revealed that he had been observing the battle from midway through and praised Shujinko's karate as truly magnificent. Shujinko, however, remained wary, initially assuming that the king might be no different from Holland. He found it surprising that the king would sit so calmly and close to him despite his earlier rampage. The king then stated that if Shujinko truly felt that way, he was free to kill him at that very moment. Shujinko was taken aback and wondered what the king would do if he actually attempted it. The king calmly replied that if such a thing were to happen, then so be it. Shujinko was surprised to hear such words from the king. The king continued by explaining that to him, the transmigrators were like an army belonging to a nation. That was precisely why he wished to have a proper conversation with Shujinko. He described their meeting as a form of peace negotiation, adding that the distance between them itself served as proof of his sincerity. As Shujinko looked into the king's eyes, he realized that it was not a matter of strength or weakness. The king was simply facing the person before him with complete honesty, revealing his true self. This left Shujinko confused about the king's true intentions. At the same time, he began to feel that he had been somewhat immature in comparison. Acknowledging this, Shujinko showed respect and admitted that he had allowed his emotions to get the better of him. He apologized for his earlier impoliteness. The king then invited Shujinko to take a seat and introduced himself as Wilhelm das Wilm van Fire, mentioning that Shujinko could simply call him Wilhelm. He further stated that, as he had said earlier, Shujinko stood on equal footing with him and that there was no difference in their status. As Shujinko took a drink, he reflected on how no one had ever treated him in such a manner before. Everyone else had behaved completely differently, yet the king neither tried to dominate him nor belittle him. Instead, he carried himself with the natural authority of a true king. At that moment, Shujinko internally acknowledged his own defeat, realizing that this was the first time he had been bested, not in battle, but in character, since arriving in this new world. The scene shifted to the area behind the royal castle where a modest mansion stood. It was the place where Shujinko had been staying as a guest of Wilhelm. He had grown fond of it, as it was the first place where he felt he could truly settle after arriving in that world and devote himself to training. As he walked toward the well, he remarked that the water and air in the area felt exceptionally fresh. At that moment, Wilma approached him, greeting him respectfully and addressing him as her teacher. Shujinko felt that she had been coming to see him every day since he started living there, especially during the morning training sessions. He wondered if she should stop calling him teacher and instead suggested that she could address him as master or instructor. He was quite surprised, however, and wondered where she had learned such formal terms. Wilma then handed him a uniform. Shujinko was surprised, as it was the first proper uniform he had received since coming into that world. She explained that his previous clothes had been tattered during the battle, and she had tried to recreate them with the help of a dressmaker from the town. She added that she had memorized every detail of the original outfit. Shujinko sincerely appreciated her effort. Wilma felt confident that it would fit him perfectly and asked him to try it on. As Shujinko tried on the uniform, he found it remarkably well made. It fit him perfectly, allowing him to move with ease. Grateful for the effort, he thanked Wilma. She clapped in delight, clearly happy with the result, and mentioned that she also had a similar uniform. This left Shujinko confused, and he wondered why she wasn't wearing it. Wilma explained that she considered herself his disciple and felt it might not suit her. Shujinko replied that it wasn't an issue of appearance, but rather that he had only recently arrived in that world and hadn't had the time or intention to take on disciples. Wilma reassured him that he need not worry, as she would simply observe his training without disturbing him. Shujinko agreed. As he prepared to train, Wilma stood nearby with another lady watching him. At that moment, Shujinko recalled his recent conversation with Wilhelm. Wilhelm had told him about the great demonic war that had taken place around 10 years ago. During that time, transmigrators like Shujinko had played a significant role in the battle. The human armies had been no match for the demon forces, and it was ultimately the planewalkers, individuals with extraordinary, almost cheat-like abilities, who had turned the tide and pushed the demons back. However, Wilhelm had explained that the real problem began after the war ended. Traditionally, the ruling class, nobles, knights, and other high-ranking figures were responsible for protecting the people by eliminating monsters. In return, the citizens paid taxes, maintaining the structure of the kingdom. But in that war, it was not the knights who had saved the world. It was outsiders like the transmigrators. Shujinko had wondered what that meant for the kingdom's power structure and felt that the reputation of the ruling class must have been severely damaged. Wilhelm had agreed, explaining that the citizens began to regard the transmigrators as true heroes. As a result, the authority of the kingdom started to waver, and those same heroes gradually came to be seen as potential threats. People who possessed enough power to defeat the demon lord were no longer viewed as mere saviors. They were also feared. He had further explained that the situation was not simple. The nobles feared losing their status, while the existence of transmigrators threatened to disrupt the very foundation of society. Shujinko had responded that he had no intention of doing anything of that sort. Wilhelm acknowledged that this might be true for Shujinko, but he questioned whether anyone who gained the power to overturn the world could truly maintain their sanity. Apologizing for his rambling, Wilhelm had then asked what Shujinko intended to do in that world. Shujinko had been reminded of the goddess who had told him that there must be a reason for his summoning, even if it was not yet clear. After hearing about other planewalkers who had fought the demon lord, he found himself uncertain about his own role in that world. Shaking off those thoughts, Shujinko focused on his training. As he practiced, Wilma began imitating his punches. She remarked that karate was an incredible technique, a form of combat that relied on one's own strength rather than monsters, innate talent, or noble authority. She expressed her admiration for the idea of believing in oneself and facing enemies without fear, something she had never considered before. As she spoke with enthusiasm, Shujinko smirked slightly. He thought to himself that he should cast aside such half-hearted doubts. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would push through them by following his chosen path, his martial way. That resolve would not change, even in a fantasy world. Suddenly, Wilma excitedly declared that she wanted to try defeating a minotaur with her own hands. Shujinko stopped her and told her that she should at least address him casually as teacher. She agreed, but instead suggested calling him Grand Master. Shujinko immediately refused, thinking that he was nothing more than a practitioner of karate. He resolved that he would simply do his best with what he had. Wilma took Shujinko out for a walk through the castle town. As they moved along the streets, many townspeople greeted her warmly. Some expressed surprise that she was still in the capital, while others offered her small gifts like apples. Children gathered around her, eager to play. Observing all this, Shujinko remarked that it was surprising how popular Wilma was among the townspeople. Geddes agreed, explaining that Wilma treated everyone equally and possessed a natural ability to love and be loved. Shujinko felt that this was true, as even in his own interactions with her, he had sensed that same warmth. Geddes went on to say that if Wilma had been born a man, there would have been no doubt that she would have been dragged into the conflict for the throne. However, he added that he did not see it as something regrettable and was instead glad that she had been born a girl. After some time, Wilma returned to them, apologizing for making them wait. Just then, a boy ran past her, brushing against her and accidentally causing her skirt to lift slightly in front of Shujinko and Geddes. Shujinko felt embarrassed, as did Wilma, who became visibly annoyed at the boy. Geddes commented that it was troublesome for her to walk around the town so freely and defenseless. As the three of them continued walking, they suddenly heard a man shouting angrily, saying that he never wanted to see a certain boy again. They soon noticed that the man was standing in front of a frail-looking child. The child tried to explain that the man should not blame him for the missing goods, insisting that the mistake had not been his fault. However, the man grew furious and said that he had known something like this would happen if he trusted someone like him. He demanded that the boy return the stolen goods. The boy repeatedly insisted that he had not stolen anything, but the man struck him brutally. Seeing this, Shujinko began to feel anger rising within him, while Wilma grew visibly worried. The man continued to berate the boy, questioning how a filthy subhuman could dare to oppose a real human. At that point, Wilma stepped forward and warned the man to stop, asking what exactly had happened. The man recognized her and explained that he had entrusted the boy with transporting goods, but believed that the boy had stolen some of them. The boy continued to deny the accusation. Sensing that the situation was not so simple, Geddes stepped in and asked the man whether he had any proof of the alleged theft. The man responded harshly, saying that someone like Geddes, a knight, should understand that being a subhuman was proof enough. Wilma firmly intervened, stating that race could not be considered evidence. She declared that the matter could be judged properly at the royal palace if necessary, and suggested that the man request a formal trial. The man, still visibly angry, pointed at the boy and warned him to deliver the goods properly before leaving the scene. After he left, Wilma approached the boy to check if he was all right. However, the boy suddenly pushed her away, telling her not to interfere. He said that even if she wanted to help, she would not be able to change anything and told them to return to the safety of the castle. Confused, Wilma listened as the boy stood up and remarked that it was easy for her to live freely in the castle and walk through the town even though she was no different from people like him. He then took hold of the carriage and prepared to leave, adding that compassion alone could not change anything. He told her that if she truly wanted to help, she would have to save all of them, not just him. Shujinko remarked that the look in the man's eyes belonged to someone who could not suppress a lurking murderous intent. Geddes agreed with his observation. Shujinko then reflected that it was similar to the principles of karate. No matter how powerful a person might be, offering help with only strength and goodwill would not be enough to eliminate the suffering in the world. He came to understand that both Wilma and the world they lived in would inevitably have to face that contradiction. As they continued walking, Wilma turned to Shujinko and apologized, saying that she had ended up showing him something unpleasant. However, with a gentle smile, she suggested that they go eat something good and asked if he was hungry. Shujinko agreed, and they decided to have a meal. When they arrived at a restaurant, the people inside were surprised to see her. Wilma, however, seemed excited, especially at the thought of eating frikadeller. At that moment, they noticed several imperial guards nearby and wondered why they were present. Soon after, Wilhelm arrived, visibly surprised to see Wilma. He asked what she was doing there and whether she was dining with the transmigrator. Without hesitation, he decided to join them. One of the ministers accompanying him hesitated and pointed out that such places were meant for commoners. However, Wilhelm dismissed the concern, saying that it did not matter, especially since frikadeller was particularly delicious there. Despite the minister's continued objections, Wilhelm proceeded to sit down with them and encouraged Wilma to start eating. He explained that the dish was similar to Hamburgen steaks and expressed curiosity about what kind of meat was used. Meanwhile, Wilma played cheerfully with the children nearby. Watching her, Wilhelm remarked that she was truly beloved by the people. He admitted that he often felt he had wronged her. Although taking Wilma's mother as his concubine had been part of an effort to maintain harmony with the demi-humans, he insisted that he had loved her in his own way. However, he added that everything had been ruined by the Great Demonic War. Wilhelm explained that during the Great War, the orcs and dark elves had sided with the demon lord. Because of this, many citizens who believed in human supremacy had grown increasingly distrustful of demi-humans. As a result, he had no choice but to send Wilma to a castle on the border for her safety. One of the men beside him added that although the castle was located on the border, it was a place with deep historical significance. However, he pointed out that it was still inappropriate for a member of royalty to reside in a place that lacked prestige. He further explained that their plans had ultimately backfired. They had revealed the existence of Osmifar's gauntlet, one of the sacred treasures which had restored the castle's powerful magical properties. However, this had attracted the attention of a thief, placing Wilma in danger. Hearing this, Shujinko wondered if the mysterious man in black was behind the incident and whether he might be a planewalker like himself. Another man present remarked that he had heard the gauntlet had already lost its power, though he could not confirm whether that was true. Wilhelm then stated firmly that the treasure was not something he would trade for Wilma's life. He added that even if it led to war, they would face it without hesitation. At that moment, Wilma approached them and asked what they had been discussing. The group exchanged glances, and suddenly, Wilhelm turned to Shujinko and proposed that he accept Wilma as his wife. Both Shujinko and Wilma were completely shocked by the sudden proposal. Shujinko nearly choked on his drink, while both of them became visibly flustered. Wilhelm, however, calmly explained that from a father's perspective, such an arrangement would solve many problems. If a transmigrator like Shujinko became part of the royal family, it would stabilize many uncertainties. He added that, in his view, there was nothing for Shujinko to object to. Shujinko attempted to stop Wilhelm, who then questioned whether Shujinko was dissatisfied with the proposal. Shujinko hesitated, explaining that he was still focused on his training. Wilma also stepped in, suggesting that they could go see the Tower of Victory, and she led Shujinko away with her. Watching them leave, Wilhelm remarked that it was time for the youngsters to spend some time together. One of the men beside him asked whether the king had perhaps gone too far with his teasing. However, Wilhelm clarified that he had been completely serious about the proposal. Meanwhile, Wilma brought Shujinko to the Tower of Victory. Shujinko was astonished by its sheer size. Wilma explained that the tower had been constructed by her father to commemorate their victory in the previous Great War. She added that from the top, one could not only enjoy a sweeping view of the royal capital, but also observe the surrounding forests. The tower had been designed so that the rulers could monitor the condition of the citizens and respond quickly in case of any unrest or rebellion. As they stood there, Shujinko suddenly noticed something unusual in the sky. Wilma, sensing his concern, asked if something was wrong. Shujinko explained that he had spotted the same man they had encountered earlier. Before they could react further, the man launched an attack on the Tower of Victory. In an instant, the massive structure was destroyed. Dark, ominous clouds gathered overhead, and the people below were thrown into panic as the symbol of their victory vanished before their eyes. Amid the chaos, the mysterious man prepared to launch his next attack, this time targeting Shujinko and Wilma directly. As debris from the Tower of Victory began to fall toward Wilma, Shujinko once again leapt forward to save her. Meanwhile, Geddes arrived with several others, all wondering what was happening. Upon checking, they found that Wilma was completely unharmed. The enemy floating in the sky remarked that Geddes had saved the very person he had been searching for at the castle. He then addressed Shujinko, greeting him as the white-robed planewalker. Geddes grew angry, recalling that someone had attacked the castle in an attempt to steal the sacred treasure. He exclaimed in frustration and questioned Javid, asking how he could have gone so insane. Javid responded that he was not insane, explaining that he had merely opened his eyes to the truth. He revealed that the Tower of Victory was connected to the Great Demonic War, which had not yet ended, and stated that he had come specifically to inform Geddes of this. Geddes remained confused, but Javid continued, declaring that he intended to end the Great Demonic War himself using the power of the artifact. Furthermore, he added that he would have to take the life of the Karate freak before that person awakened their cheat skills. Without hesitation, Javid rushed forward to strike Shujinko. However, Geddes' minister intervened and erected a magical wall, which Javid shattered effortlessly, leaving everyone in shock. The minister was astonished by Javid's overwhelming power. Javid then began to cast a spell referred to as a nuclear blast, a concept that even the minister struggled to comprehend. He remarked that using it would save him the trouble of destroying the town afterward. Shujinko realized that the nuclear blast was extremely dangerous and recognized it as the same spell that had previously destroyed the tower. At that moment, Wilma stepped forward and urged Javid to stop, questioning why he was doing such things. She reminded him that he was known as the patriotic savior of the country and the hero of the magic sword. Javid warned her to stay back, stating that he had not truly saved the country, but had only defeated the demon lord. Since the war had not actually ended, he claimed that nothing had truly been saved. Wilma disagreed, insisting that he was indeed the one who had saved everyone. However, Javid shouted that there was no point in arguing and declared that if she continued to stand in his way, he would not hesitate to attack her as well. Shujinko suddenly stepped forward, positioning himself as a shield in front of Wilma. He told Javid to stop and questioned whether he was the one Javid had a problem with. He urged him not to drag other people or innocent civilians into the conflict. Shujinko suggested that they change their location instead. Javid laughed upon hearing this and wondered whether Shujinko believed he was proposing a duel. However, Shujinko had no other choice. Rather than avoiding his fate, Javid decided to demonstrate his power, stating that they should meet at dusk on the western plains where he would reveal his limitless strength. After saying this, he departed. Shujinko remained behind, filled with anger and determination. After days of intense training, he was reminded of his past, of the time he had sat beside a hospital bed, watching his father take his final breath and leave him alone. He quickly pushed those memories aside, focusing instead on the decisive battle ahead, though a slight wavering lingered in his heart. Finally, the moment had come. He questioned whether he could truly defeat Javid using only his karate skills. Suddenly, Glenn appeared behind Shujinko and remarked that he could still obtain a cheap skill from her. She explained that Javid was a real threat, and that this ability would allow Shujinko to draw upon an infinite source of energy from all forms of magic. With it, he would even be able to activate complex spells without chanting. She demonstrated a portion of its power and warned him that facing Javid barehanded would be nothing short of suicide. However, Shujinko chose to walk away, stating that he had devoted his life to martial arts, and if that path led to his end, he was willing to accept it. Glenn, clearly irritated, commented that she had expected such a response from him and complained that it would be troublesome if he died. She muttered that he was an idiot. As Shujinko stepped out of his house, Wilhelm and the others were already waiting for him. Soon, they all departed together. The minister and Wilma accompanied them as well. During the journey, Wilma began to share her past. She explained that Javid had once been a kind person who had taken care of her when she was a child. Whenever she cried because she hated her elf blood, Javid had comforted her, telling her that all living beings were equal in the face of destiny. He had even gently patted her head. Shujinko was surprised to hear this. Wilma continued, recalling that when she had first met Shujinko, she had been trembling with fear and had been unable to act. She admitted that she never wanted to feel that way again, which was why she had decided to become stronger so that she could stand against Javid. Shujinko inferred that this was the reason she wanted to learn karate. Wilma agreed, explaining that karate meant being able to fight back even without weapons, relying only on one's own strength. Shujinko was impressed and encouraged her to continue on her path without losing hope. He told her that martial arts gave courage, and that karate was a powerful expression of that spirit. He also observed that her fists carried regret, and promised that after his battle with Javid, he would personally train her. Wilma felt happy upon hearing this. Meanwhile, the minister walking ahead of them wondered silently whether Shujinko would truly be able to win, considering the overwhelming strength of his opponent. When they finally arrived at the designated location, Javid was already waiting. As both sides gathered, Wilhelm stepped forward and took on the role of judge for the duel, asking Javid if he had any objections. Javid declined calmly. At last, the two stood facing each other in the vast open field, ready for the decisive battle. Javid began by delivering a long explanation, recounting events from nearly 15 years earlier when he had been reincarnated to fight the Demon King. He explained that it had all been part of a destiny orchestrated by the god who ruled that dimension, as well as a design influenced by the goddess. He stated that overcoming that destiny had been his burden. Shujinko responded that he did not care about destiny, but was instead curious about why a hero like Javid had turned out this way. He asked him directly for the reason. Javid replied that Shujinko would not understand, as he had only recently arrived in that world. He explained that even after the horrific battle ended and the Demon King was defeated, there had been no true peace or happiness. Nothing had changed. The aristocrats continued to enrich themselves, while the common people remained hungry and lived in fear of monsters. He questioned whether Shujinko had seen the demigods outside the walls, pointing out that only a small portion of the population benefited from peace and prosperity. According to him, it did not matter whether the Demon King existed or not, as the world remained one where the powerful exploited the weak. He added that it was no different from the country they had both originally come from. Javid further revealed that many of his companions had died during the war, and through that loss, he had come to realize that true change required overwhelming power. As his emotions surged, he unleashed an intense aura that pressed heavily upon Shujinko. He declared that he would rebuild the corrupt world from its very roots and rewrite destiny itself, overturning what the gods had created. He also revealed his intention to eliminate all planewalkers who had entered that world. Shujinko felt that in some ways they were not entirely different, yet he remained resolute and prepared to fight Javid. The overwhelming pressure from Javid's power terrified everyone present, while Wilma silently hoped for both of them to survive the battle. Wilhelm then gave the order to ring the bell, and as the knights complied, the duel officially began. Javid immediately launched an attack toward Shujinko. However, as Javid prepared a powerful strike, Shujinko suddenly closed the distance and delivered a swift punch that forced Javid to step back. Everyone watching was left stunned by Shujinko's unexpected move. The technique Shujinko used was known as oizuki. It involved pushing off the back leg to propel the body forward in a straight line, using the momentum to deliver a powerful punch. For maximum impact, the punch was released simultaneously with the forward stride rather than afterward. With proper execution, unless the opponent was more than 10 meters away, the technique could defeat them in a single strike. Following the attack, Javid was knocked back and fell nearby. Wilhelm then announced that the match was over and declared Shujinko the winner. However, Javid refused to accept the outcome. He shouted that this too was a part of the destiny he had to overcome. He admitted that he would need to take Shujinko more seriously in the future. Although he acknowledged Shujinko's victory for now, he warned him to remain cautious, vowing that he would eventually kill him and destroy the world. With that, Javid unleashed his power and escaped. As the tension subsided, Wilma ran forward and hugged Shujinko from behind, overwhelmed with happiness. Wilhelm also expressed his appreciation for Shujinko's performance. Shujinko, however, understood that his success had relied heavily on a surprise attack, which had been his only real advantage. The following morning, at Shujinko's home, Wilma learned that he was planning to leave. He explained that if he stayed, Javid might return, putting everyone around him in danger. Wilma argued that Shujinko could defeat Javid again if he came back, and reminded him of his promise to teach her karate. Shujinko admitted that he had made that promise, but said he was not yet qualified to teach her. Deep down, he acknowledged that he had been frightened by Javid's power. His victory had only been momentary, and he had even found himself wishing for the cheap skill. He realized that the only reason he had won was due to the element of surprise, and that such a tactic would not work again. Determined to improve, he concluded that he needed to refine his abilities and find a true way to defeat Javid. At that moment, Wilma asked him to take her along with him. Shujinko refused, explaining that the journey ahead would be too dangerous. However, she insisted that she would train hard every day and could handle it. Shujinko reminded her that she was a princess, and for that reason, he could not agree. Unable to hold back her emotions, Wilma began to cry and ran away, while Shujinko remained silent, unable to say anything further. Later that night, as Shujinko was packing his belongings, Glenn appeared and remarked that he should have brought Wilma along, as she had been crying. She then told him that she had something important to discuss and asked whether he was truly certain about refusing the cheat skill. Glenn explained that she did not fully understand why Shujinko had been chosen for that world, but she believed there must be a deeper meaning behind it. At the very least, she was convinced that he was the right person for it. Because of that, she encouraged him to trust himself and follow his own path. Shujinko responded that it was his decision, and Glenn admitted that she had expected as much given that he rarely listened to others. She then revealed more about the artifact, explaining that it had originally been part of a pair and that the second artifact was still hidden somewhere in the world. Upon hearing this, Shujinko realized that if it were true, Javid would undoubtedly try to obtain the second artifact as well. He concluded that he needed to find it before Javid did. As Shujinko stepped out of his house, Glenn reminded him that she was both a goddess and his guide in that world, encouraging him to move forward toward his destiny. She added that everything now depended on him. Before leaving, Shujinko turned toward the castle and silently expressed his gratitude to Wilhelm for his hospitality. He also apologized in his heart for leaving in such a manner. As he began to head onward, he suddenly noticed Wilma standing before him. She declared that if he refused to take her along, she would follow him anyway. Shujinko was taken aback, especially seeing her not dressed in her usual princess attire. Wilma explained that Shujinko was the only one capable of standing against Javid, and that she too had unfinished business with him. She insisted that she would follow Shujinko for the sake of training and would not listen to any attempts to stop her. She even declared that she was willing to leave the country and abandon her title if necessary. Shujinko was deeply surprised by her determination and remarked that if she were to disappear from the country, it could lead to serious consequences. Suddenly, a voice called out, telling Shujinko that students did not need to worry about such matters. Geddes then stepped out from the side, startling Wilma. Geddes stated that Wilma was his disciple and that, at that moment, she was not standing before him as a princess. Wilma explained that her father had already returned to the castle the previous day and that what she was about to do was necessary for her own future as well as for the future of the entire country. She went on to say that the nation would soon face a great trial as the demonic war had only just begun. A time would come when established conventions and common sense would be overturned, forcing people to change their ways. In preparation for that day, she believed she needed to see more of the world and grow stronger through her own experiences. She expressed her deep gratitude to Geddes for encouraging her. Geddes then turned to Shujinko and asked whether he was willing to accept her. Shujinko agreed, stating that he would allow her to accompany him on his journey. Geddes added that he was entrusting Wilma's safety to Shujinko. However, he suddenly pointed his sword at him, remarking that Shujinko had previously escaped after a fierce struggle with the Guardian Knight, and that perhaps it would be interesting to test him again. Shujinko commented that Geddes was putting him in a difficult position. Geddes replied that he should not take it personally, as it was simply part of his duty. As the two prepared to duel, Wilma watched in shock. Geddes charged forward and attacked, while Shujinko skillfully dodged and countered. During the exchange, Shujinko realized that Geddes' body was incredibly tough, while Geddes observed that Shujinko's upper body was packed with dense muscle, something that could not be achieved through half-hearted training. He even considered that Shujinko might be stronger than Burgundy. Shujinko remarked that they would likely have to settle their match properly another time. Geddes then knelt, admitting that he would have to decline for now, as facing someone as formidable as Shujinko was too much for an old man like him. With that, Shujinko picked up his belongings and told Wilma that it was time to leave. As they departed, Wilma asked Geddes to take care of himself. In return, Geddes wished both of them well on their journey ahead. A few days later, they finally reached their first destination, the port city of Sabinia. It was a highly diverse place, bustling with trade and activity. Upon arrival, they decided to gather some information. However, before doing so, Wilma became excited at the sight of the vast ocean and the boats spread out before them. The scene then shifted to the reception desk of a tavern's guild center, located in a suburban area of Sabinia. The receptionist, Nasurin, was lost in thought when a man called out to her several times asking if she had any rewarding jobs available. Slightly confused, she responded that high-paying jobs usually involved dangerous tasks such as slaying dragons, recovering treasures, or rescuing princesses. The man remarked that such extreme tasks were not what he was looking for, as he wanted something easier to earn money. In response, Nasurin explained that a green belt level job would be more suitable for someone like him. She then pointed toward a recently looted trading caravan, mentioning that the stolen goods were rumored to include a divine artifact. Although the truth of the rumor was uncertain, the task involved locating the artifact. The man wondered aloud about the culprits behind the attack, to which Nasurin replied that it was believed to be the work of an organization. He commented that while such jobs likely offered high compensation, they were still not worth the risk. With that, he stated that he would return later and left the place. After he departed, Nasurin informed the others present that the client was extremely wealthy and willing to pay a large sum as the task was considered top priority. She then announced to the room, asking if anyone was willing to take on the job. However, no one responded. At that moment, Basker stepped forward, remarking that it seemed to be another job related to the Mafia. He added that although they might be willing to face a dragon confronting the orc, Mafia was a risk no one wanted to take. Nasurin observed that everyone had appeared enthusiastic at first, but in the end, they all refused to take the job. She remarked that many such high-risk tasks had been piling up unclaimed. Basker responded that they could not blame the others, as they understood that opposing the Mafia would be nothing short of a death sentence. He further explained that the Mafia differed from ordinary monsters that once ruled the slums through brute violence. Their influence had now extended even into human-owned shops and ships. Anyone who dared to target them would not only be hunted down, but could also risk the safety of their entire family. Basker concluded that only a fool or an exceptionally skilled adventurer would dare to interfere with such organizations. At that moment, the guild's door suddenly opened, and Shujinku entered alongside Wilma. The attention of everyone in the room immediately shifted toward them. Shujinku asked Wilma whether that place was what people referred to as a guild, and she confirmed that it was an organization responsible for managing and distributing jobs that the resident knights could not handle. Shujinku remarked that it resembled a private military company. Meanwhile, the surrounding adventurers began whispering among themselves, noting Shujinku's unusual clothing and unfamiliar presence. Nasurin approached and asked about the color of his license belt, assuming that he was a traveling adventurer. Shujinku, appearing confused, stated that he was a black belt. This immediately caused laughter among the other adventurers, who found his claim amusing. Wilma then explained to Shujinku that the color of the license belt represented an adventurer's rank, and she noted that she had never heard of a black belt existing. Shujinku clarified that he was referring to a black belt from his own world. Basker added that, in their terms, black belt was slang for level 1 adventurers whose white belts had become dirty and blackened over time, essentially weak individuals who had failed to advance to level 2. Unbothered, Shujinku expressed his intention to join as an adventurer and asked whether he simply needed to complete the necessary paperwork. His statement left the others confused, as they did not fully understand what he meant. They suggested that he should ask Nasurin for proper guidance. Wilma greeted Nasurin, who then proceeded to bring the required documents. As Shujinku reflected on the system, he understood that level 1 corresponded to a white belt, meaning he would have to start from the beginning again, though he didn't consider it a bad thing. Soon after, a man arrived and announced that adventurers would receive their rewards only upon completing assigned tasks. He added that if someone abandoned a job or died during the mission, the guild would not bear any responsibility. Nasurin appeared pleased upon seeing that the man was Desmond. Desmond remarked that it might be a good time for Shujinko to reconsider his career choice, suggesting that it would be unfortunate if he were to die too soon. Meanwhile, Nasurin continued observing Desmond, thinking that he was exceptionally handsome, with a well-built physique and a charming face. She also noted that he was one of the strongest adventurers in the city, holding a silver belt at level 5, which made him stand out prominently. Desmond expressed his gratitude to Wilma for her hard work and remarked that she was truly very cute. His compliment left her flattered. He then turned his attention to Shujinku and observed that he did not seem to be carrying any weapon. He questioned how Shujinku intended to fight and wondered whether he was a magician or a healer, as it seemed unusual for someone to enter combat without any weapon. In response, Shujinku stated that he was a practitioner of karate and that his body itself served as his weapon. His answer left everyone around him confused. Desmond then extended his hand toward Shujinku, admitting that he did not fully understand his fighting style, but acknowledging that Shujinku had the courage to join them. He welcomed him and introduced himself. Shujinku accepted the gesture and shook his hand. Meanwhile, Wilma continued to observe Desmond, seemingly captivated by his charm. As the handshake continued for longer than expected, Desmond began to feel slightly uneasy. He then suggested to Basker that Shujinku could join them for a job the following day, mentioning that he was currently short-handed. Although it was merely his intuition, Desmond felt that Shujinku might prove to be useful. Basker agreed with the suggestion. At that moment, Wilma asked Nasurin about available jobs. Nasurin explained that most of the tasks might be too difficult for a novice. However, Desmond informed them that they were planning to head to an abandoned castle on the western side to eliminate some goblins residing there. He clarified that he would not force Shujinku to join, as the mission was dangerous. Although it differed from dealing with the orc mafia, there was still no guarantee that Shujinku would return alive. While Shujinku was resting at the inn, he found himself unable to sleep as he continued talking with Glenn. She remarked that the sea breeze felt incredibly pleasant and mentioned how much she loved port cities. She then wondered whether Kobe was similar to any city in Shujinku's world. Shujinku agreed, noting that she seemed quite well informed. Glenn explained that many people constantly came and went, which made the place unsafe. She added that there was a particular neighborhood known as the Monster Slum, where the orc mafia held control. According to her, the only things that ruled that area were senseless violence, lawlessness, and immorality. She then asked Shujinku if he could promise not to start a fight there. Shujinku responded by calling her rude, saying that she made it sound as if he enjoyed fighting. Glenn clarified that she only meant he might gather useful information about the second part of the artifact of God. Shujinku agreed to keep that in mind. Suddenly, Wilma knocked on his door and entered, intending to show him her new outfit. However, she found Shujinku standing without a shirt, which immediately made her flustered. Shujinku, confused, asked what had happened. Wilma explained that she wanted to look more like an adventurer, which was why she had bought a skirt and a cloak while they were out. She also mentioned that she had purchased a wand for herself and asked how she looked. Shujinku appreciated her appearance, saying it looked practical. He added that although it was not suitable for frontline combat, it would not be an issue since she would not be directly attacking enemies. Wilma agreed, thanked him, and decided to return to her room to rest. Shujinku wished her good night, but when he referred to her as Princess Wilma, she asked him to stop calling her that, as she was now an adventurer. Shujinku agreed and wished her good night again, this time addressing her simply by her name. The next day, Shujinku and Wilma went to an abandoned castle in the mountains. Shujinku observed that it was relatively small and likely not a royal castle. Meanwhile, Wilma eagerly awaited her turn to fight inside. After some time, Shujinku noticed that Desmond had arrived with a few others. He understood that they had partnered with Wilma's trio and appeared to be discussing strategies. However, since neither he nor Wilma had much experience fighting as adventurers, Shujinku decided that his main focus would be to avoid becoming a burden. A woman approached them and excused herself politely. Shujinku and Wilma assumed that she was also joining and was likely a solo adventurer, as she was not with any group. She asked if they were adventurers, pointing out that they did not seem to carry any weapons, and added that Wilma appeared to be a healer. Shujinku asked about her techniques, and she revealed that she was a magical swordsman. Wilma became excited and wondered if the woman had been born into knighthood. The woman confirmed this and remarked that Shujinku and Wilma seemed like beginners. She questioned whether they were underestimating goblins because of their size, explaining that while goblins were weak in one-on-one combat, their strength in groups made them dangerous, even for veterans. At that moment, Desmond approached from behind and placed a hand on the woman's back, commenting that it would be especially tough since there could be at least 100 goblins. The woman became irritated and warned him not to sneak up on her like that. Desmond laughed and said that she was as entertaining as ever. He then mentioned that he had not expected the healer, Wilma, to be there and added that her outfit looked great on her. He explained that since the mission was dangerous, they had invited a 4th-level bronze-ranked adventurer who was also the 2nd strongest person in the city. Shujinku reacted with a slight smirk, wondering about it, while Desmond stepped closer and asked if Shujinku had any problem with their arrangement. After some time, Desmond explained the plan to everyone. He said that he would fire a few arrows from a distance to ensure safety. However, since the castle belonged to the client, they were not allowed to shoot arrows at it. Therefore, he decided that the best approach would be to lure the goblins out instead. For that, he wanted Shujinku and Wilma to enter the castle and draw the goblins outside. Wilma was shocked upon hearing this, and Andy also remarked that it would be extremely dangerous. She suggested that such a task should be given to someone strong and reliable instead. In response, Desmond said that he had been surprised by his handshake with Shujinku the previous day, as very few people could match his strength. Because of that, he believed Shujinku was capable of handling the task. When Shujinku agreed to the plan, Wilma was taken aback. Desmond praised Shujinku's courage, while the others questioned whether he had gone mad, pointing out how reckless the plan sounded. However, Shujinku dismissed their concerns, saying it was not a big deal and that he only needed to stir things up around the castle. He added that if he were going alone, he would fight in his own way. As everyone watched, Shujinku stepped forward. When he noticed that Wilma was following him, he told her to stay back with Endi. Endi was shocked, as Shujinku was going alone without even carrying a weapon. Shujinku reassured them that he would be fine, as he trusted in his karate skills. After gathering his thoughts, he suddenly shouted toward the castle, openly challenging the goblins to come out. Shujinku wondered if anyone was inside, as he wanted to meet the leader of the castle. Suddenly, the gate opened, and a goblin stepped out carrying a sword and wearing pieces of armor. It questioned who Shujinku was. In response, Shujinku stated that he wanted to meet their boss. At that moment, several goblins emerged from the bushes, all armed and ready. They began discussing among themselves how they would kill Shujinku and feed his limbs to the wolves. Some of them grew visibly excited and rushed forward to attack him. As they charged, Shujinku swiftly kicked one of the goblins, defeating it instantly. This enraged the others, and they moved together to strike him all at once. However, Shujinku remained aware of the situation. He understood which techniques were effective in real combat. Although the goblins were individually weak, their killing instincts were terrifyingly sharp. At that moment, Shujinku realized why even veteran adventurers could lose their lives. Anyone with the intent to kill, no matter how small or seemingly harmless, was a real threat. As the fight intensified, Shujinku noticed that their numbers were overwhelming. He understood that if he hesitated or backed down, he would be killed immediately. Therefore, he continued fighting, defeating goblins one after another while deliberately creating chaos among them. However, more goblins kept pouring out of the castle, joining the battle against him. Shujinku recalled Desmond's earlier words about there being nearly 100 goblins. It now seemed that Desmond had been correct. Shujinku realized he could not continue like this for long. He understood that if he wanted to survive, he would have to give everything he had. With that resolve, he pushed himself further, unleashing relentless attacks to cut down as many goblins as possible. From a distance, Desmond and the others began to hear loud screams. They assumed that Shujinku was desperately running around, being chased or overwhelmed. Suddenly, one of the men informed Desmond that Shujinku was actually holding off the goblins successfully. Hearing this, Desmond became irritated and remarked that it was unfortunate that Shujinku was still alive. He then decided that they should attack Shujinku from behind instead. As they prepared for the ambush, Desmond asked how many goblins were left. The boy replied that there were hardly any remaining. Upon hearing this, Desmond was genuinely surprised. As Desmond and the others went to check the battlefield, they were shocked to see that Shujinku had accomplished everything on his own. They noticed that a few goblins were still breathing, and Desmond wondered what they should do next. Without hesitation, he began slashing off their heads, and the others followed, finishing off the remaining goblins. Desmond realized that Shujinku was still inexperienced, as he had not delivered proper final blows to ensure the monsters were completely dead. Meanwhile, Shujinku was still engaged in battle, wondering how many goblins he had already defeated. Despite knocking down so many, the goblins showed no signs of retreating. It felt as if something was driving them forward relentlessly. At one point, 2 goblins attempted a surprise attack, one from the front and one from behind. Shujinku quickly defeated the one in front, while the second hesitated as its spear pointed toward him. Seizing the moment, Shujinku struck them down. However, the goblins managed to exploit a brief opening, biting him and even shooting an arrow into his hand. Shujinku realized that the goblins were using ranged attacks even in close combat, which put him at a serious disadvantage. Understanding the danger, he decided to retreat. He quickly pulled the arrow out and ran out of their range. Elsewhere, Wilma and Endi were waiting when they heard sounds coming from the forest. Wilma immediately tried to rush forward to help Shujinku, but Endi stopped her, explaining that she would not be of much help in that situation. She added that staying and waiting was the smartest decision. Wilma, however, began to cry, saying that she did not want to just wait and wished to go help Shujinku. She hoped that he would return safely and quickly. Suddenly, they heard movement and wondered if the goblins had arrived. To their surprise, Shujinku appeared, leaping toward them and asking if Wilma was safe. Wilma felt immense relief upon seeing him. However, Endi quickly warned them not to lower their guard as goblins were approaching. She immediately attacked and stabbed one of them. Shujinku thanked her, saying that he owed her one. Endi replied that it was not a problem, and instead asked whether he was all right, given his heavy injuries. When Wilma saw his condition, she became frightened and tried to help him, but Shujinku reassured her that he was fine and told them to focus on the battle instead. Soon, a large group of goblins surrounded them. Shujinku remarked that there were not many left and suggested that they finish them off. Suddenly, both the goblins and Wilma sensed something unusual. Confused, Wilma tried to understand what it was, but Endi immediately recognized the presence. Moments later, the source revealed itself, a massive goblin, far larger than the others. It was the Goblin Champion. Shujinku immediately recognized it from the information he had gathered earlier. It was known for its remarkable physique and exceptional combat skills. Instead of feeling fear, Shujinku felt a surge of excitement, realizing that the true leader had finally appeared, and he quickly tried to stop him, warning that the creature was far too dangerous and that he would not be able to handle it in his current condition. She urged him to retreat, adding that she would take on the fight herself. However, Shujinku refused. He stated that this was a personal challenge for him. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and stood face to face with the Goblin Champion. The creature observed that Shujinku was unarmed, yet it showed no mercy. It raised its weapon and launched a powerful attack toward him. Shujinku remained firm, ready to fight. Endi, watching from behind, remarked that Shujinku would not be able to fight alone without a weapon. However, Wilma responded that Shujinku was not truly unarmed. She explained that his body and his karate were his weapons. Endi was confused by this, but Wilma clarified that Shujinku's fighting style remained effective regardless of the situation. At that moment, the Goblin Champion swung its weapon toward Shujinku. He swiftly dodged the attack and countered with a powerful kick, forcing the creature to stagger backward. Endi was stunned. She realized that Shujinku had effortlessly evaded the barrage of attacks and countered in a single, fluid motion. It was as if he could see through every strike before it even landed. As the battle continued, Shujinku began chaining together different stances seamlessly. Every movement flowed into the next, forming a continuous rhythm of attack and defense. No matter the situation, his body adapted instantly, connecting each action to the next with precision. Under the pressure of Shujinku's relentless attacks, the Goblin Champion grew enraged and hurled its weapon at him. However, Shujinku reacted instantly, deflecting it with incredible agility. In that moment, something changed within him. His mind and body seemed to align perfectly. There was no separation between thought and action anymore. Everything became one, moving in perfect harmony within a single breath. Seizing that moment, Shujinku delivered a decisive strike. With that final blow, he defeated the Goblin Champion. The remaining goblins were stunned as they witnessed the fall of their leader. Even Endi was left in shock, unable to comprehend how Shujinku had brought down such a massive creature in a single strike. Wilma immediately rushed forward to check on Shujinku, but he stopped her, warning her not to come any closer. Suddenly, the Goblin Champion rose again. Before anyone could react, it grabbed Shujinku and tightened its grip, crushing him with immense force. Shujinku realized that his earlier strike had only rendered the creature unconscious, not killed it. The situation instantly turned dangerous. The goblin then bit into Shujinku's chest, causing intense pain. Shujinku understood how effective such a move could be. Teeth were among the sharpest natural weapons, and in close combat, especially when one was restrained, it was nearly impossible to avoid such an attack. Trapped in the creature's grip, Shujinku quickly assessed his options. He applied pressure to the goblin's shoulder to destabilize it slightly, then used his fingers to create a small opening. In that brief moment, he gathered all his strength and unleashed a precise strike. It was the technique known as sunai, the one-inch punch. This secret technique required complete control over every muscle in the body, allowing power to be released instantly within a single moment. As the goblins and the others watched in silence, the Goblin Champion let out a pained scream and was finally thrown backward, collapsing to the ground. This time, it did not rise again. The duel was over. Shujinku stood firm, glaring at the remaining goblins. With a cold and commanding presence, he warned them to leave. Desmond ordered his men to kill all the goblins who were fleeing. However, Shujinku shouted at them to stop and told them not to kill those who had already lost the will to fight. Desmond became angry and questioned what Shujinku was trying to say. He argued that if they let the goblins go, they might return to attack humans again. In response, Shujinku reminded him that their mission was to reclaim the castle, not to exterminate the goblins. He further explained that killing them one by one would only lead to the formation of vengeful groups, continuing a vicious cycle of conflict and death. According to him, the conflict between humans and goblins had arisen due to circumstances, but now that the humans had achieved victory, it was sufficient for the goblins to retreat. Desmond criticized Shujinku, calling him soft. Shujinku calmly admitted that he might be, but implied that his approach was more thoughtful compared to reckless plans. After a while, when Desmond and the others stood facing Shujinku, Desmond realized that while he had been busy fighting the goblins, Shujinku had been planning to use area of effect magic to wipe everything out if necessary. However, Shujinku instead called a few goblins and instructed them to carry away their unconscious companions and leave before nightfall. He acknowledged that they likely had their own reasons for fighting, but warned them not to cause trouble for humans or demi-humans again, stating that he would show no mercy if they did. Frightened, the goblins quickly gathered their leader and fled the area. Desmond then decided to report the incident to the guild, and Shujinku agreed. Shujinku suggested that Desmond could simply tell the guild that he had handled everything himself, which only increased Desmond's frustration. As they were leaving, Shujinku asked Wilma whether she had healed the seriously injured goblins. She replied that she had done what she could, although some were beyond saving. Shujinku appreciated her efforts. Wilma then expressed her desire to heal Shujinku as well, and when he agreed, she treated him. Shujinku was amazed by her healing abilities. Meanwhile, Endi wondered why Shujinku had gone easy on the goblins and how everything had proceeded so smoothly under his lead. In response, Shujinku stated that it was not his place to judge others, as he had simply done what was necessary in the fight. After everything that had happened, one day Endi approached the receptionist, Nasurin, and asked if there was any job available for her. Nasurin replied that she did not have anything suitable at the moment. Endi appeared disappointed every day, as she did not mind assisting other parties and was even willing to take on dangerous tasks, including dealing with the mafia. However, Nasurin explained that most available jobs were for mages or healers, and none matched Endi's abilities. This left her feeling disheartened. At that moment, Desmond arrived and remarked that while it was admirable for her to act like a lone wolf, it could not be helped if there was no work available. He stepped beside her and grabbed her hand. Startled, Endi warned him not to grab her so suddenly. Ignoring her discomfort, Desmond commented that she should not rely on half measures, adding that being a spellblade would put her at a disadvantage as an adventurer. He suggested that she would be better off focusing on either swordsmanship or magic, rather than trying to balance both. Endi angrily told him that she did not need his advice. As she tried to free her hand, he tightened his grip but eventually let go when she resisted strongly. Before leaving, he told her that she could return to his party if she wished. Annoyed, Endi walked away, firmly thinking that she would never join his party again. The thought reminded her of a horrifying incident in the past when Desmond had tried to force himself on her. She had barely managed to escape at that time, and the idea of returning to his party now filled her with fear. She resolved that she would never put herself in such a situation again. Later, as she returned home, she found herself feeling saddened by her circumstances. She wondered why she had been born a girl in a family with two older brothers. The eldest had taken over their father's responsibilities, while the second had become a knight. As for her, she was expected to marry into another family, but she had chosen a different path. She wanted to live as an adventurer and travel the world, not for fame or wealth, but for the joy of it. Her father, who had fought against the forces of the Demon Lord during the Great War, was her greatest inspiration. She aspired to become like him, which was why she had chosen to specialize as a spellblade. Even in difficult situations, she wished to fight and protect others, just as he had. However, reality proved to be far harsher. There were many limitations to using both magic and swordsmanship. Heavy armor hindered spellcasting, while increasing magical power required the use of a wand, which made close combat difficult. As a result, spellblades often had to rely on warriors for protection. To wield both sword and magic, one had to sacrifice defense, as heavy armor and powerful two-handed weapons could not be used effectively alongside a wand. Moreover, casting strong or complex spells required time, something rarely available in close combat. In the end, Endi realized that she was forced to divide her efforts between offense and defense, leaving her unable to face truly powerful enemies. Though she did not want to admit it, this was the harsh reality of her life as an adventurer. Endi suddenly heard someone call out to her. As she turned, she was surprised to see Wilma and Shujinku, who thanked her for the help she had given the previous day. She wondered if they were heading home. Shujinku confirmed that they were, and mentioned that he had just gone to hand over what they had obtained earlier that night, an orc, though not an ordinary one, but a rather skilled opponent. Endi briefly suspected that it might have been related to the mafia, but noticing her reaction, Shujinku asked if something was wrong. She quickly dismissed it, saying it was nothing, and as they parted ways, she told them to be careful. Shujinku reassured her, saying that no matter what happened, even if they were left alone in difficult situations, he trusted in his karate. His words struck Endi deeply. After that, Endi arrived in front of a large house, assuming the door would be unlocked. The place seemed more like a warehouse. She thought that spellblades like her were not in high demand, and that searching for lost items in such a warehouse was merely an odd job suited for someone in her position. As she entered, she called out, politely asking if anyone was inside, and mentioned that she had come to search for a missing item among the stored goods. However, she already felt that the task would be troublesome. Suddenly, the gate behind her shut. Desmond appeared before her, accompanied by several others who had been hiding inside the warehouse. Confused, Endi questioned the meaning of it all. Desmond responded that it was a good opportunity for them to get to know each other better. Realizing his intentions, Endi grew furious. The moment she understood what was about to happen, she attempted to escape. However, as she ran, a boy suddenly opened the door in front of her and she collided with him. The boy tried to stop her, which only made her angrier, as she now realized that the entire situation had been a trap. set by Desmond. Understanding his true objective, she decided that she had to escape at any cost. Hearing the others searching for her, she managed to break through their formation without being caught. Gathering her strength, Endy used her thunder magic, forming an electric sphere. When one of the men approached, she unleashed it toward him. The attack was powerful, and she immediately followed up with a strike from her sword. Seizing the opportunity, she tried to flee again, but soon realized that every possible path was already blocked by Desmond's men. Moments later, she was struck by a sonic blast that caused her entire body to tremble violently, leaving her severely injured. She recognized it as a sound-based spell, which, when used in an enclosed space, could disrupt consciousness. Just as she began to lose awareness, Desmond appeared behind her and captured her, declaring that her playtime was over. Desmond threw his sword aside, questioning whether Endy still intended to fight. Though her body trembled, she felt her balance gradually returning. However, she remained uncertain about what to do next, knowing the situation had already worsened and that Desmond would not spare her. Desmond launched an attack, and Endy raised her sword to block it. The force behind his strike was overwhelming, far heavier than she had expected, yet she struggled to hold her ground. Gathering her strength, she managed to push herself up and attempted to counterattack, but her strike failed to land. Enraged, Desmond delivered a punch that sent her crashing backward. Laughing, he mocked her, questioning whether someone like her even deserved to call herself a righteous adventurer. Endy noticed that his tone had changed from earlier. It carried something darker. He continued, saying that if she truly intended to go after the Mafia, she would need far greater strength. Fear crept into her mind as she began to suspect that Desmond himself might be connected to them. The men around her laughed and closed in, remarking that she had been interfering in their affairs for too long. They implied that her actions had made her a nuisance, and now she would face the consequences. Endy felt trapped. Her body was weak, her strength fading, and she realized she could no longer rely on brute force alone. For a moment, despair began to take over. She questioned whether her path as a spellblade had always been flawed, whether trying to balance both sword and magic had only placed her at a disadvantage. But then, a thought surfaced. She remembered Shujinku's words, his unwavering belief in his own strength in his karate. Something shifted within her. She realized that it was not about advantages or disadvantages, but about conviction, about trusting one's own path. Recalling Shujinku's movements, his techniques, his stance, the flow between one action and the next, Endy steadied herself. As Desmond moved toward her again, she made her decision. In an instant, she struck back. With a sudden burst of force, she delivered a powerful kick that caught Desmond off guard. At the same time, she extended her leg backward, striking the person restraining her. The unexpected counterattack broke their formation. Freed from their grasp, Endy regained her footing. Desmond staggered back, his expression twisting with anger, unable to believe that she had dared to fight back. Desmond reached for his weapon, declaring that he would never forgive Endy for what she had done. He warned her not to run, threatening that he would kill her and even send the Mafia after her if necessary. Endy struggled to steady herself. She no longer had her sword, and defeating Desmond with bare hands seemed impossible. The only option left to her was magic, particularly lightning-based attacks. But techniques like lightning bullets required complex casting, and she knew Desmond would not give her the time to prepare. As Desmond advanced, she stepped back only to realize there was no path left behind her. Cornered and overwhelmed, she felt a surge of panic, unsure of what to do next. At that critical moment, she remembered Shujinku's movements. As Desmond lunged forward, Endy reacted instinctively. She stepped in and struck him with a forward palm, channeling electricity through her hand. The impact forced him backward. She later recognized this move as an open palm electric shock attack. Furious, Desmond charged at her again, but she repeated the same motion, striking him with another electrified blow and knocking him back once more. Confusion spread across his face as he failed to understand how she had executed such a technique. Endy, however, understood what she had done. Instead of forming lightning into a projectile, she had released it directly through her body at the moment of impact. By abandoning the complex process of creating lightning bullets, she had transformed her magic into immediate, close-range attacks. Everything had happened within a single breath. It was the true potential of a magic swordsman. For the first time, she felt confidence rising within her. She no longer believed that she was powerless without her weapon. Just then, a voice echoed nearby, calling her pathetic, and he immediately became alert, scanning her surroundings and wondering who had spoken. The voice continued, telling her to stay where she was, claiming that it had come to take her back. Before she could react, a massive boar suddenly charged at her from behind. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to another location, where Shujinku and Wilma were waiting. Suddenly, Nasurin arrived, visibly distressed. Seeing her condition, Wilma asked what had happened, but Nasurin struggled to speak. Moments later, Basker appeared and revealed the situation. Endy had been kidnapped by the Orc Mafia. Shujinku was truly shocked when Nasurin showed him a paper, explaining that it was what they had received. Basker informed Shujinku that the mafia members were demanding the release of their captured companions and were also insisting that Shujinku accept a duel. Shujinku wondered if it was some form of revenge. Basker agreed, explaining that Shujinku had disrupted their business and that was likely the reason they preferred a duel over assassination, so they could execute him publicly. Wilma was completely confused by everything, while Basker questioned whether Shujinku was a planewalker. Shujinku wondered how Basker knew about it. In response, Basker questioned how long Shujinku thought he had been working as an adventurer. He explained that orcs especially hated planewalkers because many of them had been killed during the Great Magic War. Somehow they had discovered that the one disrupting their business was also a planewalker. Because of this, they were enraged, and Basker supposed that was why they had taken hostages, to set a trap for Shujinku. He then wondered what Shujinku would do. Wilma looked at Shujinku, waiting for his response. Shujinku, filled with rage, stated that it was fine and that if one did not enter the tiger's den, one could not catch its cub. With that resolve, Shujinku decided to accept the duel. The scene then shifted to the battlefield, which was filled with monsters. Endi was tied up while the orc lord, the great pig demon, sat nearby. Endi begged him to kill her, but the demon questioned why he should hurry, stating that once Shujinku was dead, he would kill her as well. He added that he had even prepared a special seat for her to watch the event. He then attempted to touch her inappropriately, ordering her to remain quiet and witness Shujinku's death. Eventually, Shujinku arrived at the battlefield, and the crowd began cheering for his death, urging each other not to fear him. Basker felt helpless, realizing that guilt would not help Shujinku, and despite their wishes, it was impossible for them to act openly. At that moment, Wilma wondered what Shujinku was truly thinking as he walked into the tiger's den. Meanwhile, Shujinku had already understood the situation. If there was even the slightest opportunity, it had to be seized, even at the cost of his life. He looked around at those who wished for his death and thought that even if he won, escaping alive seemed unlikely. Then, noticing someone standing before him, Shujinku wondered if that person was his opponent? That person suddenly unleashed his power toward the sky. As Shujinku watched, a fire djinn, Ifrit, was summoned. Endi was terrified, stating that it was impossible for Shujinku to win. She added that she had believed the great pig demon had promised a bare-knuckle fight and questioned how he could allow the use of a summoning technique. The great pig demon found it amusing and replied that the black elf was more than capable of fighting with his bare hands. At that moment, Shujinku remained calm. Endi thought that there was no way Shujinku could defeat Ifrit barehanded, but Shujinku trusted in his karate and believed everything would be fine. The monsters rang the bell, signaling the start of the match. As Ifrit stood before Shujinku, Shujinku anticipated that it would rush in with a flame attack, so he decided to keep his distance while observing its movements. However, he quickly noticed the intense heat radiating from Ifrit's body, so much so that he could feel his skin burning even from afar. He realized that a direct strike would surely result in severe burns. While he was still considering how to evade the attacks, Ifrit suddenly launched its assault. Shujinku struggled to fight back and suffered minor burns, yet he remained standing. As he carefully observed Ifrit's movements, he began to see a possible path to victory. The great pig demon remarked that Shujinku was clever to dodge so effectively, but added that it was only a matter of time before he would be burned to ashes once caught. Endi was deeply worried, thinking there was nothing she could do. At the same time, she was confused about why Shujinku was smiling. Shujinku's opponent commented that Shujinku was indeed skilled at dodging, but questioned how he would evade the next attack. In response, Ifrit unleashed a second assault, an explosive firestorm. The monsters grew excited, convinced that Shujinku would finally be burned to death. Endi, filled with dread, thought that this outcome had been inevitable. Suddenly, the great pig demon grew confused, wondering what was happening. Everyone was shocked to see that Shujinku was still alive. Shujinku declared that such breath attacks would not work on him. In the next moment, he closed the distance and landed a punch on his opponent. It was an opening for Shujinku, and he was about to strike when Endi suddenly shouted for him to stop. She warned that if he touched Ifrit without any protective magic, his arm would burn instantly. However, Shujinku was reminded of his past training. He recalled how he had once extinguished the flame of a candle from several meters away using a straight punch, a technique often demonstrated by skilled karate practitioners. He reflected that it was commonly misunderstood as the flame being blown out by the air pressure from the punch. In reality, the technique required a perfectly straight punch with precise form, aligning the arm and fist. This motion created a rapid displacement of air, forming a ripple that generated a brief vacuum. The resulting effect caused a momentary drop in oxygen around the flame, extinguishing it. Remembering this, Shujinku remained composed, confident in the technique he had mastered. The scene returned to the present, where Shujinku had successfully neutralized Ifrit's flames. Everyone was left in shock, as such a feat seemed impossible. Without hesitation, Shujinku stepped forward and delivered a straight punch to Ifrit. When Ifrit attempted to retaliate with another burst of flames, Shujinku countered by targeting its head. He reasoned that the creature was not merely a mass of fire. If it had a physical form, it must possess a brain. Since it resembled a human, its vital points were likely similar as well. With that understanding, he believed there was no reason he could not win. After defeating Ifrit, the crowd was stunned. They began to wonder what kind of cheat skills Shujinku had used, yet it was clear that he had fought bare-handed and still emerged victorious. Even the great pig demon was visibly shocked, though he expressed his admiration for Shujinku. Soon, others joined in applauding him. However, the atmosphere shifted as murmurs about the divine hand began to spread throughout the crowd. As the name echoed around the battlefield, Endy was left confused. One of the monsters asked the great pig demon whether Endy should be killed, but he refused. He explained that it would be improper as they were outlaws who followed a simple philosophy, to respect strength above all else. Although they were often oppressed by humans and despised their weakness, Shujinku had neither used magic nor weapons, nor relied on any cheat skill, yet still defeated Ifrit with his bare hands. For that reason, the demon believed Shujinku deserved respect, and he would not break his promise. He then ordered Endy's release. Endy quickly made her way to Shujinku while the crowd continued to chant, "A divine hand!" Curious, she asked how his ability worked, since he had defeated Ifrit barehanded. She examined his hand and found nothing unusual, which only deepened her confusion. She wondered whether it was related to karate and questioned what karate truly was. Shujinku replied that finding the answer to that question was the very reason he had come to this world. Meanwhile, a monster asked the great pig demon if it was wise to let Shujinku go. The pig demon agreed that Shujinku would eventually be killed, but not that day. He revealed that he had already prepared someone for that purpose, someone who would not fail. As he was leaving, he noticed a weak summoner being dragged away by other monsters. Without hesitation, he ordered them to kill the man. It seemed that Shujinku's battle had earned him fame across the land as the Divine Hand, but at the same time, it had drawn the hostility of the Orc Mafia. This would inevitably lead to a bloody conflict in the near future. The scene then shifted to another location, a town where several people had already been slaughtered. A severely injured man begged Gladio to spare his life, but Gladio ignored his pleas. With brutal force, he kicked the man and delivered the final blow, ending his life without hesitation. The scene shifted to a port where humans were secretly negotiating with orcs over an artifact. It was there that Shujinku arrived, stating that this was as far as they could go and that he had no interest in whatever they were trading. The orcs were startled and questioned who he was. Reacting immediately, they drew their weapons and prepared to fight. In response, Shujinku leaped into their midst and swiftly struck down one of the orcs. As another moved to attack, Shujinku countered effortlessly, delivering precise kicks and defeating them one by one. One of the men noticed the white cloth worn by Shujinku and wondered if he was the rumored Divine Hand. Realizing they stood no chance against him, the group began to retreat in fear. However, before they could escape, a radiant holy light illuminated the sky. It was Endy's magic. Soon after, both Endy and Wilma arrived, declaring that the criminals could no longer rely on the cover of night. They ordered them to drop their weapons and surrender, warning that escape was no longer possible. Desperate, the enemies attempted to push through. When one of the orcs saw Wilma, he shouted furiously, demanding that she move aside. Yet, before he could act, Wilma effortlessly brought him down. A short while later, Shujinku approached, expressing curiosity about the ability Wilma had just used. Wilma, delighted, admitted that she had acted instinctively without fully thinking it through. Afterward, their attention shifted to the artifact lying nearby. The scene then transitioned to the old giant toy tavern, where Shujinku, Endy, and Wilma gathered to discuss the information they had obtained. Endy agreed, explaining that the item was neither a sacred treasure nor a magical artifact, it was merely an expensive material. From that, she concluded that the pirates had simply been deceived by the orcs. She added that the real problem lay with the orcs, and that Shujinku had unintentionally provoked further growth of the mafia by getting involved. As they discussed the situation, they also worried that Wilma might become a target as well. However, Wilma remained completely unconcerned, continuing to eat without paying attention to their concerns. Noticing her unusual appetite, both Shujinku and Endy looked at her in surprise, wondering what had gotten into her. Shujinku felt that this was not the most urgent issue, as their primary objective was to locate the remaining part of the artifact before Javid did. Endy casually remarked on how much Wilma was eating, while Shujinku began thinking about how to handle the increasing hostility from the mafia. Suddenly, Wilma called out to him, excitedly mentioning her golden kick and asking what he thought about it. Shujinku acknowledged that it was impressive, but as he began to demonstrate something further, Wilma quickly stopped him and attempted to imitate his movements herself. This caught the attention of others in the tavern, who began to wonder whether Shujinku was the rumored Divine Hand. Soon a crowd gathered around him, eagerly asking him to teach them as well. Meanwhile, one man approached Endy, asking if she would join him for a drink. At that moment, Basker arrived and wondered if things had already begun. While Wilma commented that Shujinku had suddenly become very popular, Basker considered whether he should try learning karate too, while Nasurin jokingly wondered if there was a beginner's course for women. Suddenly, a group of adventurers barged in, noisily pushing chairs aside. They commented that something felt off and pointed out the presence of a long-eared individual inside the tavern. They began mocking an elf boy, who calmly replied that he was simply enjoying a drink he had paid for. That boy was none other than Gladio. The crowd grew hostile, questioning whether there was a problem, and stating that it was a place exclusively for humans, not for someone who had abandoned humanity like Gladio. Andy was visibly displeased by their behavior, but Shujinku stopped her, signaling her to remain calm. At the same time, he observed Gladio closely, sensing a powerful aura emanating from him. As Gladio stood up, the atmosphere shifted, leaving everyone confused by his presence. Shujinku realized that Gladio was no ordinary person. Gladio then questioned whether they were looking for a fight, and remarked that they should understand what he was capable of. In an instant, he demonstrated his strength by crushing a drink bottle with his bare hand and sending its broken top flying into one of the men. The crowd was stunned. Another man, angered by this, dismissed it as nothing more than a trivial trick and charged at him. Gladio swiftly leaped into the air, twisted the attacker's arm, and threw him onto the roof. As more attackers rushed forward, he effortlessly defeated them one after another. Once it was over, Gladio calmly apologized to the tavern for the disturbance, placed some coins as compensation, and, while leaving, apologized to everyone for ruining their mood. Watching all of this, Shujinku understood that the young man was extraordinarily strong. Gladio went to the demi-human street, where a few castle guards noticed him. After observing him for a while, they allowed him to enter. He proceeded further inside, heading upstairs, where another guard informed the pig demon that Gladio had arrived. The pig demon was already standing there. Gladio wondered what the pig demon could possibly want from him. The pig demon then requested his help in killing someone. Gladio became confused and stated that he would not do such a thing. However, the pig demon clarified that he only wanted something similar to what adventurers usually did. Gladio hesitated, doubting his own abilities, but the pig demon responded that it was a fair deal and promised to reward him. He even offered to make Gladio a leader if he desired. Gladio refused the offer. In response, the pig demon mentioned that in Gladio's village it had been hundreds of years since a child was born. Shocked, Gladio told him not to bring up such matters. The pig demon continued, explaining that Highland elf children were extremely rare and that many aristocrats would be eager to get their hands on them. Angered, Gladio questioned whether the pig demon was trying to threaten him. The pig demon replied that he should not misunderstand, as the village was under the protection of the mafia, which would keep it safe from humans. He then insisted that Gladio simply follow his orders. Gladio realized that the fate of the village depended entirely on his decision. After a moment of thought, he reluctantly agreed. As Gladio left, another person approached the pig demon and asked whether Gladio would be difficult to control. The pig demon responded that Gladio was an impressive individual and that it would be beneficial if they could make him their leader. The pig demon further stated that if Gladio refused to become one of his followers, they would simply eliminate him. The other person responded that it would be profitable for the pig demon regardless of who ended up being crushed. The pig demon laughed and mockingly referred to the orc lord, pig demon Galdios. The other man did not seem to mind how the situation unfolded and was merely looking forward to the outcome. Galdios then questioned whether the planewalker would become a hindrance. The man replied that fate was the only thing that truly mattered and that the planewalker was merely a manifestation of the will of that world. He added that he would personally present the skull to Galdios. Galdios looked at him skeptically, wondering if he was truly certain. The man confirmed his confidence, explaining that this was something he had originally intended to take control of and that everything was being guided by chaos. Meanwhile, Gladio exited the castle, where the guards addressed him as teacher and stated that they would leave everything in his hands. As Gladio walked away, a goblin from the mafia approached him and offered to accompany him to the town. The goblin wondered whether Gladio truly intended to kill that person, noting that Gladio's strength was extraordinary and that killing someone simply for standing in the way seemed wrong. The goblin admitted that although he hated humans, his clan had joined the mafia because their boss had claimed they were allies who could provide them with work. In return, the goblins were protected from other organizations, including humans. However, the current boss was different, and the goblin confessed that he could not defy him. Even if he resisted alone, it would put the entire village at risk. Noticing Gladio's confusion, the goblin began to think that there was something unusual about Shujinku, as he did not appear to be as strong as expected. After a few days, Shujinku went to an open area, as he had been challenged to a duel by Gladio. When he finally arrived with Wilma and Endy wondered what Shujinku was planning to do. Shujinku was surprised to see that his opponent was Gladio. He understood that this was not a casual meeting, but a duel. Wilma questioned whether there was any real difference, prompting Andy to explain that in such duels, the winner held the right of life and death over the loser. Shujinku accepted Gladio's challenge but asked for the reason behind it. Gladio admitted that he held no personal grudge against Shujinku but had been ordered to kill him. However, he at least wanted to face Shujinku in a fair, head-on battle. As Shujinku prepared himself, Wilma shouted at him, questioning why he had accepted such a duel when there was nothing to gain from it. Shujinku replied that Gladio was staking both his life and pride on the fight, and therefore, he could not simply turn his back on him. Andy was shocked, wondering how Shujinku had sensed Gladio's resolve so quickly, though she still considered him somewhat foolish. Shujinku then asked Wilma to carefully observe the fight, stating that it would be a valuable lesson for her. Gladio then unleashed his aura and revealed that his specialty was high-level magic jujutsu. He explained that he was not suited for bows or conventional magic, but instead excelled in overwhelming opponents through close combat. He also expressed confidence that his skills were not inferior to Shujinku's karate. Shujinku found this impressive. Having encountered jujutsu practitioners in the real world, he had never seen anyone stand with such perfect posture and readiness. Gladio, who had previously held back, now moved without restraint. In an instant, he closed the distance so quickly that Shujinku barely had time to react. When Shujinku attempted to strike, Gladio redirected the attack, applying pressure to Shujinku's shoulder and throwing him to the ground using a reflex-based technique. Gladio attempted to maintain control, but Shujinku seized an opportunity and kicked his leg, breaking free. As Gladio prepared to counterattack, he used his agility to shift his position, dodging even while close to the ground, which momentarily surprised Shujinku. Suddenly, Gladio grabbed Shujinku's arm and used his legs to trap him, forcing him down again. Just as he was about to follow up with another attack, Shujinku countered by striking Gladio's femur with a powerful punch and then kicking him in the face, sending him back. Despite the heavy blow, Gladio stood firm once again, facing Shujinku without hesitation. Andy was astonished. A man who appeared small and seemingly powerless was displaying terrifying skill after skill. Aisha, observing the battle, remarked that elves were naturally closer to the realm of magic than humans, as they lived in harmony with nature's spiritual energy. She was deeply impressed by the intensity of the fight, noting how the wind spirits seemed to move in perfect harmony around Gladio. The elves were naturally slender and were generally considered weaker than humans, often finding themselves at a disadvantage in melee combat where physical strength played a crucial role. However, over a long history, they had developed unique combat techniques. By wrapping wind magic around their bodies, they were able to move freely, suppress their opponent's strength, and even manipulate their enemies' movements regardless of who they faced. However, facing an unprecedented and powerful opponent like Shujinku was a completely different matter. Gladio remarked that it was as expected of someone from another world and admitted that the fight would not be easy for him. He resolved to counter all of Shujinku's techniques, reminding himself that this was his duel. For that reason, he believed that Shujinku would have to die for Gladio's sake. Meanwhile, Shujinku found himself uncertain about what he should do next. Suddenly, Gladio rushed forward and engaged him. During their exchange, Gladio found an opening and launched Shujinku into the air. Taking advantage of the situation, he used a technique called Gladio to strike him, which was nearly impossible to avoid while being airborne and defenseless. Gladio believed that this would be the end of Shujinku. However, Shujinku chose to endure the attack and took the brutal blow directly. At the same time, Gladio was caught off guard as he had also been struck during the exchange. Shujinku was sent flying and landed some distance away while Gladio realized that Shujinku's counterattack had been unusual. He wondered whether it had been a deliberate counter to Gladio. Shujinku later stated that he had sacrificed a battle in order to win the war. Moments later, Gladio collapsed, while Shujinku remained standing. Wilma could not understand what Shujinku meant by losing a battle to win the war. Andy, on the other hand, realized how dangerous that decision had been, thinking that a single mistake could have cost Shujinku his life. She recognized it as an extremely risky gamble. However, Gladio declared that the fight was not over yet. Wilma was surprised, wondering if Gladio intended to continue fighting. Andy urged him to stop, pointing out that his collarbone had already been broken and that there was no reason to continue. Nevertheless, Gladio insisted that it was a duel, and it would not end until one of them died. He added that he had yet to show Shujinku the full extent of ancient elven magic jujutsu. With that, Gladio rose again and prepared to attack using a secret technique known as Sphere. Shujinku observed as Gladio created a barrier around himself. The moment it approached, it struck Shujinku and forced him backward. He was confused as he had not even been given a chance to defend himself. Every attempt to stand was met with continuous attacks that pushed him back again and again. Wilma recalled hearing that wind magic users could perceive movements through vibrations in the air, allowing them to detect even the slightest motion in their surroundings. She realized that this technique extended that principle, forming a field around the user. Shujinku began to understand that the sphere functioned like a nervous system, reacting instantly to any movement. Even the slightest action caused his body to be repelled violently. Now trapped under constant pressure, Shujinku found himself uncertain about how to counter the technique, as he continued to be struck repeatedly without an opening. Andy remarked that even Gladio would not be able to properly finish Shujinku with his sword in that condition. Wilma appeared deeply worried for Shujinku and wondered why he did not simply stay down and wait for Gladio to exhaust his energy instead of continuing to fight. However, Shujinku stood up once again. He thought that if he could not overcome this, he would not be worthy of calling himself a karate practitioner. Gladio launched another attack, yet even after being struck, Shujinku continued walking forward. This left everyone shocked, and Gladio began to wonder whether his attacks were even affecting Shujinku anymore. As Shujinku advanced, he recalled his training days. Alongside karate, he had also dabbled in judo. He remembered that a judoka needed an unshakable stance to resist throws that aimed to break one's center of gravity. The sphere technique reminded him of the same principle. He realized that one of the simplest yet most difficult techniques in judo was to stabilize the center of gravity. As long as his center remained firm, he would not be thrown away by such forces. Gladio continued attacking relentlessly, but Shujinku endured each strike and steadily moved closer. Step by step, he closed the distance until he finally reached Gladio and delivered a powerful head strike against him. After that punch, both of them fell to the ground. Shujinku remained conscious and felt that he had won, but both of their collarbones were crushed, leaving them unable to continue fighting. Wilma rushed over to check on Shujinku and wondered whether he could stand up. Shujinku replied that he could and asked her to check on Gladio instead. Wilma moved to heal Gladio, and when he tried to move, she told him not to and advised him to take deep breaths and relax. She explained that his collarbones would not heal immediately, but she had eased the pain to help him regain his strength. She added that he should remain within the light and allow it to heal him. Shujinku thought that Gladio was truly strong, possessing unmatched willpower and strength. He reflected that elves had long lifespans, and if they devoted themselves to martial arts, they could become exceptionally skilled fighters. As Shujinku sat beside Gladio, he wondered how someone like him had been able to use long-range magic and questioned why he had not used it throughout the battle. Wilma was surprised by this, and Andy also felt the same, noting that Gladio had relied entirely on melee combat from beginning to end. Just as Gladio was about to explain, a goblin appeared and stated that he was the reason behind everything. Gladio did not seem pleased to see him. The goblin apologized and explained that their boss had ordered him to aim a dart at Shujinku from behind, knowing that Shujinku would challenge Gladio head-on. That was why Gladio had kept the fight in close combat, to prevent the plan from succeeding. Shujinku felt confused upon hearing this, but Gladio dismissed it, saying that it was nothing like that and that he had simply been focused on winning. He then asked the goblin whether he had been ordered to kill both of them. The goblin responded that Shujinku was remarkable despite being their enemy, pointing out that during the battle at the fort, Shujinku had not killed a single one of them. Because of that, the goblin did not wish to kill him. He added that even Gladio seemed tired of everything and suggested that they should leave the gang. Andy realized that the gang he was referring to was the Orc Mafia. The goblin explained that Gladio did not want to be part of it, but his village was under the Mafia's control, and the elves there were being held hostage. Wilma was shocked to hear this. Gladio continued, saying that he had been sent by the Mafia to kill Shujinku, but the duel itself had been genuine, and he had accepted it with sincerity. As he extended his hand for a handshake, Shujinku accepted it and remarked that he did not know how the outcome would have changed if Gladio had unleashed his full power. Gladio replied that he had already done everything he could. Shujinku then suggested that they should have another round once both of them had healed. Gladio agreed, admitting that he had truly enjoyed their battle. The goblin warned them that the Orc Mafia would certainly come after Shujinku. The group then wondered who the Mafia would send next, especially after failing to assassinate their target. Afterward, Shujinku and Endi headed toward the demon-human town, where the elves glared at them. Endi asked whether Shujinku's wounds had fully healed, and Shujinku replied that they had, thanks to Wilma. However, he questioned why they had come to that place, as it seemed suspicious. Endi revealed that those people had caused her a great deal of trouble, and she intended to repay them. Eventually, they arrived in front of a castle where the guards questioned who they were and why humans were there. Endi defeated the guards and broke the door open, only to find many orcs already waiting inside with weapons. Shujinku glared at them and demanded that they take him to the one known as the Divine Hand. The orcs became excited upon hearing that Shujinku himself was the Divine Hand. Endi commented that the nickname was embarrassing, but Shujinku replied that he used whatever worked, as that was the essence of martial arts. Soon after, they heard the gate open, and a voice invited Shujinku and Endi to come inside. It was the lady boss who permitted them to enter, stating that they were guests of her boss and should be treated with proper hospitality. She introduced herself as Grazier and welcomed them to the Ark Palace. Shujinku remarked that they had been allowed to enter surprisingly easily. Grazier responded that she did not mind, as she had no reason to refuse their visit. As they stepped inside, the gate closed behind them and several wolves suddenly appeared, surrounding them. Andy grew frightened upon seeing them, realizing that they were all thrust. With only the two of them present, the situation overwhelmed her and left her visibly shaken. Grazier remarked that they kept those beasts as pets, occasionally feeding them guests as a form of snack. She then warned Shujinku and Andy to be careful around them. The two beasts lunged at Shujinku and Andy. Andy attempted to slash at them with her power bite, but she realized that the creatures reacted instantly. Despite their massive size, they were incredibly agile. Shujinku faced both of them alone, observing that they resembled dogs, the animals most familiar to humans. However, these creatures possessed extraordinary combat strength, along with sharp fangs, claws, and a level of intelligence that allowed them to assess their opponents. At one point, Shujinku was nearly caught by the tail of one of the monsters as it attempted to bite him. He felt an overwhelming sense of intimidation, unlike anything he had experienced with ordinary monsters. And he sensed that the situation was turning against them and feared that she might lose her life in close combat. Realizing this, she concluded that she needed to find an opening and rely on the range of her sword. She began preparing a powerful blast through her magic. However, Grazier immediately dispelled it, stating that they could not call themselves beast tamers if all they did was hide behind their monsters. She warned them to be cautious of her magic bullets. Suddenly, several attacks were launched toward Grazier, which angered her. As the battle intensified, Shujinku even attempted to throw one of the monsters at her. Grazier thought that her earlier concern had been unnecessary. From observing Shujinku's attacks, she concluded that their impact was being condensed, meaning that he relied on deflection rather than direct force. Using one of the beasts as support, Shujinku leaped into the air. At that moment, Grazier launched another attack, but Shujinku recognized that this was not something he could counter with ordinary karate techniques like ukewaza. Throughout his training, Shujinku had studied the movements of animals. He understood that for dog-like creatures, their hind legs formed the foundation of all their attacks. Targeting that point would be the key to defeating them. With that in mind, he launched himself toward the beast's leg. As he prepared to land his punch, the creatures hesitated, showing fear. Shujinku immediately realized that they had lost their will to fight. At that moment, he felt that the battle was already over. Meanwhile, Andy used Thunderbolt on the other beast, only to realize that it could easily dodge her magic. She understood that she could not match its speed and would be at a disadvantage if the fight continued like this. When she attempted to cast Thunderbolt again, the creature evaded it and leapt toward her. She tried to defend herself with her sword, but it proved ineffective. As she was knocked down beneath the beast, she decided to switch to close combat and struck it at point-blank range. Shujinku, noticing this, grew concerned and asked if she was all right. Andy reassured him as she rose from the beast, stating that she was unharmed. However, in a moment of distraction, the snake-like monster lunged at her. Before it could strike, Grazier suddenly intervened and sliced the creature down. Shujinku questioned Grazier, asking whether she truly intended to continue the fight. In response, she grew furious and ordered the orcs to kill both of them. Realizing that the battle was far from over, Shujinku remarked that they would have to keep fighting. Andy stood ready beside him, fully prepared. Since they had come there looking for a fight, they decided to begin by taking down the orcs. They continued battling, and after defeating several of them, the remaining orcs began to hesitate. However, Shujinku and Andy did not stop and continued overwhelming their enemies. Shujinku questioned the remaining foes, asking what was wrong and whether they had no intention of fighting him. Grazier, now visibly frightened, hesitated as Shujinku approached her. She wondered if he truly intended to attack someone as defenseless as her. Instead, she pointed toward the stairs and revealed that the real person they were looking for was upstairs, inviting Shujinku to proceed as her guest. As Shujinku began heading upstairs, Grazier attempted a surprise attack from behind. However, her plan failed when Andy intervened and struck her down. Afterward, Shujinku and Andy proceeded upstairs, entering a corridor so dark that they could see nothing ahead. Andy observed that the place seemed extremely old and complex, suggesting that it might have been designed to confuse intruders. Shujinku, however, stated that their enemy was straight ahead, as he could sense a strong killing intent coming from beyond the doors in front of them. Without hesitation, Shujinku moved forward and opened the door. To his surprise, he found a lizardman standing inside who revealed that he had been waiting for him for quite some time. Shujinku observed the lizardman and wondered whether it was the second bodyguard. Confidently, he declared that he would deal with it as well and stepped forward. Andy, however, moved back cautiously, explaining that the lizard race was known to be extremely powerful. She noted that they were said to possess dragon blood and were considered closer to demon gods than to ordinary subhuman races. Curious, Shujinku asked for the creature's name. The lizardman replied that he was called Goi Gocha, a name that meant the one who advances and shatters. Shujinku remarked that Gocha seemed strong and suggested that they begin. With that, the battle started. As Gocha launched his attacks, Shujinku initially focused on dodging, carefully observing his movements. He quickly realized that Gocha was incredibly powerful. His long arms and legs created a wide attack range, making it difficult to find openings, and his techniques were precise enough to halt Shujinku's advances. Determined, Shujinku moved in again, attempting to close the distance and break through Gocha's guard. However, before he could strike, Gocha delivered a powerful kick. Shujinku managed to block it, only to realize that Gocha had followed up with a second strike immediately after. Although Shujinku avoided most of the attacks, he was eventually hit and found himself confused about how Gocha had managed to land the blow. As he tried to recover, Gocha pressed the attack again, using his tail as a pivot to enhance his movements and speed. Shujinku steadied himself and remarked that different species possessed different martial arts techniques. Gocha agreed, stating that humans were weak and that fighting them was a boring hunt. Gocha attacked once more, but Shujinku evaded the strike, causing the wall behind him to shatter. Another attack followed, destroying a nearby pillar. Creating some distance, Shujinku began analyzing Gocha's movements. He realized that the tail played a crucial role in his fighting style, allowing for balance, power, and unpredictable motion. He reflected that just as elves had developed their own martial arts, lizardmen had also evolved a unique combat style suited to their physical traits and environment. The other demons arrived, wondering about the kicking technique they had just witnessed. Carvina immediately went on guard, suspecting that they might be pursuers. However, the orcs asked her to wait, explaining that they had no intention of interfering in a duel between warriors, as doing so would only waste the opportunity to witness its conclusion. They admitted that the so-called strong opponent was indeed formidable, but pointed out that he was at a disadvantage against Gocha. They also noted that Shujinku would not be able to endure for more than 5 minutes, which only heightened everyone's excitement for the battle. Shujinku continued blocking Gocha's attacks, though not all of them. As time passed, the orcs began cheering for their boss, and Vincent observed that Shujinku was gradually being pushed back. At that moment, it seemed likely that Carvina was beginning to regret issuing the challenge. Before anyone could say anything further, Shujinku himself appeared to realize how extraordinary Gocha's fighting style was. The combination of dual dragon hand swords, beast-like scales, and double kicks enhanced by a tail created techniques that were far beyond anything found in the ordinary world. There seemed to be no clear way to counter them. When Shujinku finally attempted to strike back, Gocha grew confused, questioning why Shujinku appeared to be on the defensive. He even mocked him as a pathetic loser. However, Shujinku had already noticed that Gocha's movements were becoming slower than before. Though Gocha remained confused, Shujinku suddenly seized the moment and delivered a powerful kick that caused him intense pain. Everyone watching was taken by surprise. Shujinku then remarked that he could not allow himself to be impressed by such techniques. Gocha, still puzzled, wondered what had just happened and questioned whether Shujinku had struck him with his elbow during the exchange. Shujinku, however, had already begun targeting Gocha's fragile joints. He planned to follow up with his sword, first aiming to eliminate the troublesome dragon hand swords. Realizing that a precise strike to the wrist could weaken Gocha's grip, Shujinku moved swiftly. He delivered another kick, seized the opportunity, and captured Gocha, slamming him forcefully onto the ground. Shujinku landed a powerful kick on Gocha, leaving everyone stunned. Carvina wondered if Shujinku had already won the battle. However, Gocha suddenly got back up, and Shujinku realized that he had managed to stand despite the impact. Although Gocha had been briefly deceived, the decisive kick had clearly caught him off guard. Shujinku observed that Gocha's thick and long lizard-like neck was unusually resilient, as it had absorbed most of the impact. He understood that if it had been an ordinary human, they would have likely been knocked unconscious. And instead, the sensation felt as though he had kicked a suspended tire. Strange and ineffective. Gocha then remarked that Shujinku was human, but ironically suggested that Shujinku seemed more like the lizard man. In response, Shujinku began imitating Gocha's techniques, which made the spectators even more excited to watch the fight unfold. Carvina sensed that the atmosphere was growing increasingly intense, reminding her of the battle against Gladio. Meanwhile, Gocha launched another attack at Shujinku, but Shujinku countered in his own style. As he fought back, he wondered if Gocha had abandoned multiple rapid strikes in favor of delivering a single, more powerful blow. Shujinku realized that unless he could break through Gocha's kicking technique, he had no chance of winning. Suddenly, Gocha struck him with a powerful kick, followed by a blow from his tail which sent Shujinku crashing to the ground. Shujinku felt that the battle was raging like a tornado, completely locking him into combat. Gocha's blood-armored body, equipped with deadly natural weapons, made the fight extremely difficult for him, and Shujinku could not help but feel envious of such abilities. He even thought that if karate practitioners possessed a tail like Gocha's, their entire fighting style would evolve into something far more advanced. Suddenly, an idea struck Shujinku. He rushed toward Gocha, and both of them leapt into the air, preparing to strike each other midair. Shujinku reflected that karate kicks were not limited to just 1 or 2 strikes, so he attempted to execute a combination exceeding that limit. He launched a sequence of more than 3 kicks, forming what he considered his finishing move, the empty sky triple kick. However, Gocha did not hold back. He counterattacked immediately, striking Shujinku again with his tail. Both of them were sent crashing down, leaving the spectators confused about what had just happened. The battle had reached such an intense level that no one could determine the winner. After a brief moment, everyone was shocked to see that Shujinku was still standing. He remarked that someone else had used a similar technique, even if the terminology differed. It became clear that Shujinku had emerged victorious over Gocha. Gocha remained silent, while Shujinku reflected on the triple kick he had used, realizing that the true difference lay in the precision and accuracy of their techniques. Shujinku then turned toward the orcs and stated that he had experienced enough of their hospitality, asking if they would now take him to their boss. The orcs did not respond immediately. At that moment, Shujinku heard the voice of a girl who complimented his strength. Carvina wondered who the girl was. The girl introduced herself as Perm and offered to guide Shujinku to the location of their boss.